Hi guys, and welcome to Gentle History for Deep Sleep tonight. You arrived just a little too late. A thin layer of ash drifts slowly through the air, settling softly on your shoulders, light as snow but warmer than it should be. You brush it away without thinking, only to notice how quiet everything is. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the sound of wind, just a stillness that feels unnatural. You take a slow breath, and there is a faint, bitter taste in the air. It lingers longer than expected. You pause, because something here does not quite make sense, and the more you notice, the clearer it becomes. If you were truly standing here, you would not have time to understand it. You probably would not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights, flow straight into the story. You stand in the dark doorway of a small dwelling in the 1700s, and the first thing you notice is not the cold itself, but the absence of warmth. That sounds dramatic, yes, but the body's a very dramatic little tenant when the rent is paid in heat. The room has the hollow feeling of a place that was recently alive. A hearth sits against the wall, low and black, its stones faintly dusted with ash. A few curled flakes drift when you move, as though the fire has only just whispered its last word. You step inside slowly because the floor is uneven and because winter makes every sound feel larger. The boards complain beneath your feet. Somewhere in the wall, old timber gives a soft tick, cooling after hours beside flame. The air touches your cheeks like cold water. It slips under your collar. It finds the soft places at your wrists. It is patient. Cold in a room like this does not rush. It simply enters everything and waits for you to notice. The house smells of smoke, damp wool, old straw, and the sour trace of human breath trapped through a long evening. There is no friendly crackle from the hearth, no orange light shifting over the ceiling, no black kettle muttering in that comforting way kettles have as if they're gossiping with gravity. Only the pale shapes of furniture sit around you, chairs and stools and a table, each one collecting the night. In much of 18th century Europe and North America, the hearth is not decoration. It is kitchen heater, lamp, drying rack, social centre, and sometimes the nearest thing to a household clock. When the fire goes out in winter, it is not merely inconvenient. It changes the room from shelter into a slower version of outdoors. You feel that truth immediately. The chimney which carried smoke away only hours ago now becomes a vertical throat for cold air. It breathes down into the room. Very rude of it, honestly, after all that hospitality. You move closer to the hearth and crouch. The ash is soft, grey and powdery. You hold your hands above it. Nothing. Not even a hidden blush of red. You stir gently with a charred stick and find only dead fragments, delicate as old bone. A small thread of smoke lifts and vanishes. There may have been a fire here at dusk, perhaps even late into the evening, but someone has misjudged the fuel or fallen asleep too soon, or simply had nothing left to burn. This is where the night becomes dangerous in a quiet way, not cinematic, not fast, just steady. The cold presses itself into the clay, chinking between beams, the cracks around the door, the gaps near the shutter. It gathers near the floor, first pooling around your ankles. You can almost imagine it as a pale invisible mist rising inch by inch, patient as a debt collector. You listen. Outside the world is muffled. Snow may be lying over the yard thick enough to swallow hoofprints and soften the usual noises of village life. Or perhaps there is no snow, only frozen mud, hard as pottery beneath a moonless sky. Either way, winter has taken the night in both hands. You hear a faint scrape at the shutter, a branch maybe, or a loose peg, or the tiny performance of your imagination which in the cold becomes very theatrical. A mainstream historical fact settles beside you here during the 1700s. Ordinary households often depended on open fires, stoves were available and carefully managed fuel stores to survive winter nights. There is no thermostat waiting on a wall, no insulated modern envelope around the house, no polite little radiator clicking awake because you complained at 2:13 in the morning. Warmth is made by labour carried by hand, purchased with money gathered from woodland rights or begged from dwindling supplies, and when warmth is gone you begin to understand how deep the night can be. You rub your palms together, the skin feels dry and tight, your breath appears faintly in front of you, a brief cloudy veil. It disappears almost as soon as it forms. You try not to panic because panic is energetic, and energy is a thing you may need later. Besides, this is bedtime history, we panic softly here. On the mantel, if this humble shelf deserves such a grand name, a few objects sit in the gloom, a stub of candle, a chipped cup, a twist of cloth, perhaps a tinderbox if you're lucky, though luck in the 18th century has a habit of taking long walks in the wrong direction. Flint and steel might wake a spark, but only if dry tinder is nearby, only if your hands can manage the motion, only if there is fuel enough to build the spark into flame. A fire is not a switch, it is a negotiation. A quirky little tidbit comes to mind as you peer into the ash. Some households kept embers alive overnight under a careful cover of ash, banking the fire so it might be revived in the morning. In some places, if a family lost its flame completely, a child might be sent to borrow live coals from a neighbour. Imagine that errand. Not a cup of sugar, not a phone charger, just a pan of glowing survival carried through the dark with everyone pretending this is normal, because for them, it is. You reach toward the cold stones. The hearth gives back nothing. That is the particular cruelty of a dead fire. It still looks like the place where warmth should be. It still has the shape of comfort. But the promise is gone. Historians still argue whether people in the 18th century experienced winter cold as a constant misery, or as an accepted rhythm shaped by habit, clothing, and expectation. Of course, both can be true. People adapt to hardship. They also suffer through it. Your body does not care how culturally normal the cold is. Your toes are not writing an academic essay. They are quietly filing a complaint. You straighten and turn toward the room. A bed stands in one corner, enclosed perhaps by curtains or rough hangings depending on the household's means. A stool rests beside it. A chest sits against the wall. The door behind you is not perfectly fitted. You can feel the draft before you see the gap. It slides across the floor, a narrow river of air. You imagine it passing beneath the bed, under the table, around your boots, exploring the room with all the curiosity of a cat and none of the charm. The silence now feels crowded. In the 1700s, silence at night is rarely total. There are animals shifting in byres, wind moving through thatch, someone coughing in another room, a cart far off on a frozen road. But here everything seems held still by the cold. The night is not empty, it is waiting. You draw your arms round yourself and notice the ash on your sleeve. Fine, pale, almost weightless. It marks you as someone who has arrived after the useful part of the evening. The work has been done. The meal, if there was one, has been eaten. The fire has burned low, then lower, then gone. You're left with the question that shaped many winter nights before electric comfort softened the world. What now? You look again at the hearth. You look at the door. You look toward the shadowed bed where warmth might remain. If someone has slept there recently, if the bedding is dry, if no draught has found it first. Each possibility feels small, but small things matter in winter. A tucked blanket, a closed shutter, a shared body of heat, a coal hidden under ash. Survival is often not heroic. It is fussy. It is practical. It is someone muttering, "Well, that could be worse," while wrapping their feet in another layer of cloth. And so you begin not with action yet, but with attention. You let your eyes adjust. You breathe more slowly. You learn the room by shadow and smell and touch. The cold continues to gather, but you gather yourself too, piece by piece, thought by thought. until the dead hearth becomes not an ending, but the first clue in a long winter night without fire. You remain by the hearth a moment longer as if staring might coax it back to life. It does not. Ash is stubborn like that. It has already made its decision. So you shift your weight exhale slowly and begin the small, careful search that winter demands. Your hands move first. In the dimness sight is a luxury. Touch is quicker, more honest. You reach along the edge of the hearthstones, feeling for anything overlooked. A forgotten sliver of wood, a chunk of charcoal, even a stubborn ember hiding beneath the ash like a secret. Your fingers sift gently. The ash clings to your skin, dry and fine, slipping into the lines of your palm. Nothing. You withdraw your hands and rub them together more for comfort than warmth. The room presses in a little closer now. Without the distraction of the hearth, you begin to notice the other absences. No stacked wood beside the wall, no neat pile of peat bricks, no bundle of kindling tied with twine. Whoever lived here either used the last of it, or never had enough to begin with. You glance toward the table. A single stool sits tucked beneath it as though even furniture prefers to huddle in winter. On the surface your fingers find rough grain, a few crumbs hardened by cold, and a shallow groove worn by years of use. You trace it absent-mindedly. It feels like the echo of meals long finished. In the 1700s, fuel was not simply gathered at will. Woodlands were often controlled by landowners, and the right to collect fallen branches, called estovers, could be limited, argued over, or quietly stretched beyond permission when winter grew severe. You imagine someone from this house walking miles to gather scraps, carrying them back in aching arms, counting each stick as if it were coin. Because in a way it was. You crouch beside the table and peer underneath. Sometimes people store small reserves where they will not be noticed or taken. Your hand brushes against something soft, not fuel. Cloth. You pull it free. A worn rag, perhaps once part of a garment now reduced to utility. It smells faintly of smoke and something sharper like old vinegar. Not useful for fire, not yet. A faint sound reaches you then. Not inside. Outside. A soft crunch. You freeze listening. Another step. Or just the settling of frost on wood. The night plays tricks like that. It offers possibilities and lets your mind choose the most interesting one. You tilt your head, holding your breath. Silence again. You release the breath slowly. Even that feels like an effort now. The air is colder than before, or perhaps you're simply noticing it more. That is the quiet danger. Cold does not always arrive suddenly. It introduces itself politely, then stays longer than invited. You move toward the chest by the wall. Its lid is slightly warped, the wood swollen and shrunken by seasons of damp and frost. You lift it carefully. The hinges protest with a soft, complaining creak. Inside, your hands find layers of fabric. Linen, wool, a coarse blanket folded with more hope than precision. You lift one piece. It is heavy, thick, and smells faintly of lanolin, good wool, or at least decent enough. In colder regions during this period, wool was essential. It traps heat even when damp, which makes it something of a miracle material in a world without central heating. You drape it over your shoulders. Immediately the air feels slightly less intrusive, like a door has been politely but firmly closed. Still, you're not warm, not even close, but you are less exposed. Beneath the blanket you find something else, a small object hard and angular. You bring it closer to your face, squinting. A tinder box. You turn it in your hands, feeling its weight. Promising. Inside there may be flint steel and perhaps a scrap of charcloth. The ancient recipe for fire reduced to a portable hope. You open it slowly. There is flint. There is steel. But the charcloth, you pause. It is there, yes, but thin, fragile, used. A resource stretched to its limit. You imagine someone striking sparks here night after night, careful not to waste a single fragment. because once it is gone, making more is not trivial. It requires preparation time and inconveniently a fire, a small circular problem. You close the box again, holding it a moment longer than necessary. This is not a solution, not yet. A spark without fuel is just a brief reminder of what you lack. A strange, almost comforting thought drifts through your mind. In some parts of Europe there were traditions of fire lending where neighbours shared embers in times of need. It was not charity exactly, but a kind of mutual understanding. Today it is your hearth that is cold. Tomorrow it might be mine. Of course that system works best when everyone has at least a little to spare. In harsher winters, generosity can become selective. You set the tinderbox aside and stand slowly. The room tilts for a moment, not from dizziness, but from the way your senses are adjusting. The cold sharpens certain things. The texture of wood, the faint scent of damp earth beneath the floor, the distant creak of the house settling into itself. Historians continue to discuss how much agency ordinary people had in managing their winter resources, whether shortages were primarily due to poor planning, structural inequality, or simply the unpredictability of weather and supply. You suspect, standing here, that the answer is not neat. It rarely is. You move toward the shuttered window. Your fingers find the edge and press lightly. It holds, but not perfectly. A thin thread of air slips through the seam, brushing your knuckles like a quiet warning. You press harder, adjusting it just enough to reduce the draft. A small victory. The kind that would not impress anyone in a modern apartment, but here it matters. Every tiny improvement matters. You turn back toward the centre of the room, the blanket still around your shoulders. The bed waits in the corner, its shape softened by shadow. You consider it. Beds in this period are not just for sleep. They are survival tools. Layers of fabric sometimes enclosed by curtains designed to trap warmth and keep it close. A bed can become a small personal climate if you prepare it correctly. But you hesitate, because once you commit to the bed, you're choosing stillness. And stillness in the cold is a complicated ally. It conserves energy, yes, but it also allows the chill to creep deeper, slower, more thorough. You glance once more at the hearth. Still nothing. Of course nothing. Ash does not change its mind. You exhale, watching your breath fade. The room is no longer just a place, it is a puzzle. Each object, each draft, each scrap of fabric is a piece. You begin to understand that survival tonight will not come from one grand solution, but from a series of small, careful decisions. Close this, wrap that, move here, wait there. It is almost methodical. You pull the blanket tighter around yourself and take a step toward the bed, the floor creaking softly beneath you. The cold follows, of course. It always does. But now you're not simply standing in it. You are beginning to work with it. And somewhere in that quiet shift from passive to deliberate, you feel the faintest, most fragile sense of control return, like the memory of warmth, rather than the thing itself. You move closer to the wall beside the bed, drawn not by comfort yet, but by curiosity. The cold feels stronger here. Not just present, but active. It slides along the surface, slips through unseen seams, and rests against your skin with quiet persistence. You raise your hand and place it flat against the timber. It feels almost alive, not warm, not even neutral, just deeply, steadily cold. The kind of cold that has been building for hours, maybe days, soaking into the very structure of the house. You press a little harder, as if you might find a hidden warmth beneath. There is none. The wall does not resist. It accepts the cold and passes it along, generous in all the wrong ways. You lean closer, peering into the faint lines between the beams. The chinking mud clay straw, whatever mixture was available, is cracked in places. Small gaps, barely visible in daylight, now serve as quiet doorways for the night air. You can feel it if you hover your fingers nearby. A whisper of movement. A thin, steady intrusion. It is strange, really. From the outside, a house like this looks solid, protective, a boundary between you and the world. But from the inside, especially on a night like this, it feels more like a negotiation. The walls are not keeping winter out so much as slowing it down. In the 1700s, most homes for ordinary people were built with practicality rather than insulation in mind. Timber frames, wattle and daub stone if available, but rarely anything designed to trap heat the way modern materials do. Glass windows, where they existed at all, were often small and imperfect. Shutters did more of the work than the panes themselves, and every joint, every seam, every tiny imperfection became a path for cold air to explore. You shift your weight, and notice the floor beneath your feet. It is colder here, too near the wall. The chill seems to rise from below, as if the earth itself is participating in the effort. You tap your foot lightly, solid, but unyielding. No hidden warmth waiting beneath. A thought drifts in, quiet and slightly absurd. In some regions, people once believed that certain draughts carried more than just cold, that they could bring illness or even spirits into the home. A sudden chill across the back of your neck might be blamed on something unseen passing by. You glance over your shoulder just briefly. The room remains still. No spirits tonight. Just physics doing its patient work. You pull the wool blanket tighter around yourself. It helps, but only where it touches. Your shoulders feel less exposed now, but your hands, your face, your feet, they remain vulnerable. Cold is selective like that. It finds the gaps. It always finds the gaps. You move along the wall, testing it with your hands. Here a wider crack. There a place where the chinking has fallen away entirely, leaving a narrow slit open to the outside. You press your fingers against it and feel the air push through steady and indifferent. You could block it perhaps. Cloth if you had enough. Straw. Anything to slow the flow. You glance back at the chest. The rag you found earlier. Not much, but something. You retrieve it and return to the gap. Folding it once, twice, you press it into place. It holds barely. The draft softens, not gone but reduced. A small victory again. It is almost humbling how much effort goes into such a tiny improvement. In a modern room, you might not even notice a draft like this. Here it feels like closing a door against the night. You step back and observe your work. The wall looks no different. No grand transformation. But the air has shifted subtly. Less movement, less intrusion. You nod to yourself as if you have completed something significant. Because in this context you have. A mainstream historical detail settles into your thoughts before the widespread use of effective insulation. People often relied on layered defences, thick walls, interior hanging, strategically placed furniture to reduce drafts and retain heat. It was less about sealing the house completely, and more about creating pockets of relative warmth within it. You glance toward the bed again. Curtains, if they exist, would serve a similar purpose. Not decoration, but defence. A way to carve out a smaller space where your own body heat might linger, instead of escaping into the larger room. You move closer now, your steps slow, deliberate. The cold has changed slightly. Not weaker, but more familiar. Your body is adjusting, learning its patterns, its habits. There is a strange kind of clarity in that. Discomfort, yes, but also awareness. Historians still debate the extent to which people in this period were accustomed to indoor cold versus actively struggling against it each night. Did they simply accept it as part of life, or did they feel it as sharply as you do now every time the fire died? You suspect the answer lies somewhere in between. Habit dulls the edge perhaps, but it does not remove it entirely. You reach the bed and rest your hand on its frame. The wood is cold, but not as deeply as the wall. Good sign, maybe. You lean closer, lifting the edge of the covering. Inside, the darkness feels different. Softer, more contained. You pause there, half-bent, listening again. The house responds with a faint creak, a subtle shift. The kind of sound that could mean anything or nothing at all. Outside, the silence continues thick and unmoving. No footsteps, no voices. Just the quiet weight of winter pressing against every surface. You straighten slowly, your breath steady, your movements careful. The room is no longer entirely unfamiliar. You have mapped part of it now. The hearth, the table, the chest, the wall, the bed. Each one a piece of the night's puzzle, and the cold still present, still patient, but no longer quite as mysterious. You adjust the blanket once more, tucking it closer around your neck. The fabric scratches slightly against your skin, but the warmth it holds is worth the minor discomfort. You flex your fingers, testing them. Still responsive. Still yours. For now. You take a small step back from the wall, then another, moving toward the centre of the room again. The air shifts with you, subtle currents brushing past your legs. You can almost feel the shape of the cold now, the way it gathers, the way it moves, the way it waits. It is not just something you endure, it is something you begin to understand, and that in a winter night without fire might be the most important change of all. You turn from the breathing wall and lower your gaze to your own clothing, because at some point in a winter night history becomes very personal. Not kings, not treaties, not a powdered wig making questionable life choices in a palace mirror. Just fabric, thread, seams, the small practical question of whether enough layers stand between you and the dark. Your outer garment is stiff with cold. When you move it rustles softly, as though frost has taught the cloth a new language. Beneath it, linen clings faintly to your skin, not wet exactly, but not dry enough to be comforting. That is one of winter's more irritating tricks. You do not need to be drenched to suffer from damp. Little moisture in cloth, a little sweat from earlier labour, a little breath settling into fibres, and suddenly your clothing is working for the wrong team. You pull the wool blanket higher over your shoulders and begin to search for anything more useful. The chest waits beside the wall, its warped lid open like a tired mouth. Inside you find folded pieces of life, a spare shift, a length of rough wool, a knitted cap slightly misshapen as if made by someone determined rather than gifted. You lift it with a strange tenderness. Whoever shaped it may have done so by rush-light hands moving slowly after a long day, counting stitches, while the wind made opinions at the shutter. You put it on. Instantly your head feels less exposed. Not warm exactly, but less abandoned. And honestly, in this room, less abandoned is a respectable achievement. Across much of the 18th century, clothing was one of the main defences against indoor cold. People did not expect every room to be warm. They warmed themselves instead with wool stockings, caps, shawls, stays, waistcoats, petticoats, coats, cloaks, and layers that could be added or removed as needed. The modern habit of wandering through winter rooms in a thin shirt would have seemed either luxurious or deeply unserious, possibly both. You find a pair of stockings and sit carefully on the edge of the bed frame to pull them over your feet. The wool resists at first, catching at your heel, then settles into place. Your toes complain as circulation changes. A prickling begins, tiny and unpleasant but promising. Feeling returning to cold feet is rarely elegant. It is more like being scolded by ants. You breathe through it. The room remains dim, but your hands are learning their work. You feel for fastenings, hems, knots, and folds. Each item of clothing has a purpose. Linen nearest the skin because it can be washed more easily than wool. Wool above it because wool holds warmth. Outer layers to block drafts. Something around the neck if you can manage it, because cold loves a collar like gossip loves a village well. You take the length of wool from the chest and wrap it around your torso, crossing it over your chest, before tucking the ends beneath your arms. The effect is clumsy. Fashion will not be stopping by tonight, but the pressure is comforting. You create in essence a warmer version of yourself by trapping air close to the body. That trapped air matters. Clothing does not produce heat on its own. Your body does that work. Clothing simply persuades the heat not to leave so quickly, which is a delicate negotiation with a very rude universe. A lesser-known curiosity from the period whispers up here some people use straw not only for bedding but as emergency insulation around feet or under clothing during bitter weather. It sounds odd until you remember that straw traps air rather well. Not glamorous, no, but neither is freezing politely. You glance toward the corner where a small bundle of straw lies near the bed. Bedding, perhaps. Packing. Animal litter. In the 18th century, categories can be more flexible than a modern person might prefer. You hesitate, then gather a cleanish handful and shake it gently. Dust rises dry and grassy. It smells of field storage and faintly of mouse. Lovely. Very pastoral. Very please do not think too much about it. You tuck a little around your boots, not inside where it might rub, but around the ankle gaps where air sneaks in. It helps more than dignity would like to admit. You stand again, testing your movement. More layers mean more warmth, but also more stiffness. Your arms feel thicker, your shoulders round slightly beneath the blanket. You move like a bundle of laundry that has gained consciousness. Still, the cold feels less sharp now. It cannot touch as much of you directly, and that alone changes the night. Among social historians, there is continuing disagreement about how much warmth ordinary people gained from clothing compared with household heating. Surviving inventories list garments, blankets, cloaks, caps, and bedding, but they do not always reveal how these things felt in use, or who had access to enough of them. A household might own woolens on paper, yet still have children sleeping cold, servants borrowing layers, widows pawning blankets, and everyone pretending the draft is not personally insulting them. You return to the chest and search further. At the bottom lies something heavier, perhaps a cloak, perhaps a coat. You lift it out with effort. It smells of smoke rain and human use. The fabric is coarse but dense. You shake it once, and a few dry flecks fall to the floor. Not ash this time, mud maybe, bits of road. Whoever wore this walked through weather and brought some of it home. You put it on over everything else. The weight settles around you like a slow hand. It changes your posture. It also changes your mood. There is psychological warmth in heavy clothing, a kind of permission to endure. You draw the front closed and hold it there, wishing for a pinnacord anything. You find a strip of cloth and tie it loosely around your waist. It is not graceful, but the 18th century has already declined your application for glamour. Now your breath feels warmer against your face beneath the shadow of the cap. Your ears stop aching quite so loudly. You flex your hands, then tuck them beneath your arms. The fingers warm slowly in the pockets of heat beneath your sleeves. The silence of the room returns, but it is less threatening than before. You're still cold, very cold, but you have made yourself harder to reach. You look toward the shutter, then the wall, then the dead hearth. The room has not changed much, but you have. Layer by layer, you have become a small moving shelter. Wool over linen, cloak over wool, blanket over shoulders, cap over hair, straw guarding the ankles like the world's least impressive but still loyal soldiers. Outside, winter presses its face to the cracks and waits. Inside, you stand wrapped in every poor defence you can find, breathing slowly, listening to cloth settle and boards creak. The cold has not been defeated. That would be a silly thing to claim, and history dislikes silly claims almost as much as it dislikes clean socks. But it has been delayed, slowed, made to work harder, and on a night like this, delaying the cold is not failure, it is the work of staying alive. You stand wrapped in your uneven layers and listen beyond the room. At first there is only the house itself, timber murmuring, straw shifting, your own breath moving in and out, visible for a moment then gone. But after a while your hearing adjusts to the winter silence, and the silence begins to separate into smaller things. A scrape near the shutter, a faint creak from the yard. Somewhere far away, perhaps the low sound of an animal turning in its stall. The village is asleep, or pretending to be. You move toward the door with the caution of someone who knows cold is waiting on the other side with far too much enthusiasm. Your hand finds the latch. Iron bites your fingers through the thin protection of cloth. You lift it slowly, easing the door open just enough to look out. The night enters at once. It slides around your ankles, climbs your legs, slips beneath the blanket, and reminds you that indoors, however poor, was still a barrier. Outside, the cold has no manners at all. You narrow your eyes. The yard beyond is pale in the faint light, whether from snow or moon or both. The world seems flattened, softened, and emptied. Fences become dark lines. Roofs become low white humps. The lane is a ribbon of shadow between cottages. You step out. The first breath outdoors stings. It enters your chest too sharply and you have to slow yourself. In weather like this, haste wastes warmth. You pull the cloak tighter and close the door behind you, though not fully. You leave it resting against the frame so you can return without fumbling. A tiny practical mercy. The village lies around you, not large, perhaps only a handful of dwellings clustered near a road. A church, a manor, a mill, or whatever local gravity gathered lives together here. In the 18th century, many rural communities were still deeply dependent on shared labour, shared knowledge, and shared hardship. People knew who had fuel, who owed money, who had lost a cow, who had quarrelled with a landlord, who had taken more branches from the wood than custom allowed. Privacy existed, yes, but it was thin like the wall you just left. You walk slowly into the lane. Snow, if that is snow beneath your feet, gives a muffled crunch. If it is frozen mud, it answers with a sharper crack. Either way, the ground feels iron hard. Your toes, recently wrapped and encouraged, begin to regret every decision that has led them here. You keep moving. A cottage to your left shows no light. Its shutter is closed tight, but a faint smell of smoke clings around the chimney. Someone inside has kept a fire, or at least banked embers. You can smell the difference between dead ash and living warmth now. It is subtle, but real. Smoke from a live hearth has a damp, bitter richness, and it lingers like a promise. You almost knock. You imagine the scene. A sleepy neighbour rising angry at first, then worried. A door open just enough. A face half hidden in wool. A question spoken in a whisper because night is not a time for loud needs. Do you have a coal to spare? A little wood? A corner near the hearth? Such requests are not simple. Heat belongs to the household that managed to preserve it. To share it is kind. To refuse it may be necessary. Winter makes morality very practical, which is inconvenient for everyone who prefers simple stories. A curious custom from several European villages comes to mind. In some communities, the last household to keep a flame alive could become an informal source of fire for others the next morning, especially before matches became common. It sounds almost charming until you imagine being the person whose hearth has failed at midnight, standing in the lane, with ash on your sleeve and no guarantee that anyone will open the door. You pass the cottage without knocking. Not because you are brave, because you are listening first. Further along, another house shows a thinner sign of life. A tiny reddish line glows behind a shutter. Crack vanishing as you shift angle. Someone has light. Candle maybe. Firelight perhaps. You hear a cough from within, then another. The sound is muffled but human, and it changes the entire lane. You are not alone here. You are among sleepers, sufferers, watchers, mothers, keeping infants close, old people tucked beneath blankets, servants curled near kitchens, and perhaps children packed together like loaves in a cupboard of quilts. The social history of warmth is not just about objects, it is about closeness. Families shared beds, servants slept near workrooms, animals might be kept near living quarters. Curtains, doors, and bodies created little islands of heat. Modern comfort often means space. In this world, comfort often means less space, more layers, and accepting that someone's elbow is now part of your climate system. You continue down the lane, the cold pressing hard against your cheeks. A dog barks once from somewhere unseen, then thinks better of it. Sensible animal. No need to waste breath making announcements to the moon. You stop near the village well. Its cover is rimmed with frost. A bucket hangs stiffly from a hook rope, frozen into a rigid curve. Water is its own problem in winter. If the well freezes, or the pump seizes, or the stream crusts over every household, must spend precious energy just getting water. Fire melts. Ice, warms, drink cooks, grain, cleans, cloth, softens frozen hands. Without fire, even water becomes harder to use. The cold multiplies tasks, then charges interest. There is a scholarly disagreement about whether 18th century rural communities were reliably cooperative in crises, or whether scarcity often revealed sharp divisions of class reputation and obligation. Parish records show help, charity, and neighbourly support. Court records and complaints show theft, conflict, and suspicion. Standing here, you can feel how both truths could share the same lane. You look toward the larger house at the village edge, perhaps the home of a better-off farmer or local official. Its chimney stands broad and dark, with a faint plume lifting into the night. A stronger fire, maybe. More fuel stored. Better walls. Perhaps glass in the windows. Perhaps meat in the pantry. Perhaps someone there is too warm to think about you at all. The thought is not bitter exactly, it's simply clear. Heat has a geography. It gathers around money, land rights, labour and luck. Some homes glow, others go quiet. Tonight yours is one of the quiet ones. You pull the cloak closer and turn back. The lane behind you looks almost dreamlike, soft and still beneath the winter sky. Yet every closed door is full of private effort. Someone is waking to tend embers. Someone is holding a child beneath the covers. Someone is silently calculating how much fuel remains until market day. Someone is sleeping through the danger because exhaustion is stronger than caution. You return toward the house you left, following your own faint marks in the snow or frost. The door waits slightly ajar, a dark line against darker wood. No warmth spills out, of course, but shelter does. Familiar shelter, poor shelter, still yours for this night. You step inside and close the door carefully behind you, pressing until the latch settles. The room receives you with its stale smoke, dead ash and narrow quiet. After the outdoor cold, it almost feels gentle. Almost? You stand there breathing, listening to the village beyond the walls. You know now that the night is not empty. It is full of hidden hearths, guarded embers, sleeping bodies, thin mercies and unanswered knocks. And the knowledge follows you back toward the bed, soft as ash, sharp as frost. You return to the hearth as if it might have changed while you were outside. It has not. The ash sits exactly where you left it, pale and collapsed, a soft grey geography of failure. You crouch again, not because you expect to find warmth now, but because the hearth has become the centre of every question. Why did the fire die? Why was there no fuel nearby? Why does this room feel less like a home and more like a test set by winter itself? You look around with a more practical eye. The absence of fuel is no longer just an inconvenience. It is a history lesson, and like many history lessons, it arrives wearing uncomfortable shoes. In the 1700s, fuel could decide the shape of daily life. Wood, coal, peat, charcoal, furs, brushwood, straw, dried dung in some regions, and anything else that burned with tolerable usefulness became part of survival. The exact fuel depended on place. A forested district might rely on coppiced wood. A moorland household might cut peat. A city family might buy coal by weight. A poor cottager might gather hedge clippings, fallen twigs, or whatever could be collected without attracting too much attention from someone who believed the landscape belonged to him personally, which often it did. You run your fingers along the empty space beside the hearth. There should be something here. A stack, a basket, a few sticks tucked close for morning. Even a miserly little bundle would feel comforting. But there is only cold floor and a dusting of ash. Fuel is not merely heat. It is cooked food, boiled water, dried clothing, light at the end of a working day. It is the difference between damp bedding and tolerable bedding, between soup and grain that remains stubbornly hard, between a room where fingers can mend cloth and a room where hands curl uselessly in sleeves. You stand and move toward a corner where shadows gather. Perhaps something has been stored there, hidden from casual view. Your foot nudges a basket. Empty. You lift it, and a few splinters fall from the weave. It smells faintly of bark. A wood basket, then. Recently used. Completely spent. There is a small cruelty in an empty basket. It proves there was once a plan. You think of woodland management, of coppicing, that old method of cutting trees near the base so new shoots grow again. Coppiced wood supplied fuel fencing tools and craft materials across many parts of Europe. It was careful, seasonal, skilled work. It also belonged within systems of rights and ownership that did not always favour the person shivering beside an empty hearth. The poor might have legal permission to gather deadwood in some places, but permission is not the same as abundance. After a hard freeze, after storms, after population growth, after rising prices, after landlords tightened access, after every household in the area had already searched the hedges and lanes, what remained could be little more than damp twigs and resentment. You glance toward the door again, remembering the faint smoke from other cottages. Somewhere nearby fuel still burns. Not here. A strange little historical detail drifts through your mind. In parts of Britain and Ireland, dried peat could be stacked in long outdoor clamps, carefully arranged to shed rain and air through the pile. A good peat stack was almost a household treasure, dark and blocky smelling of bog and labour. To a modern eye it might look humble. To a cold household it looked like future evenings. No such stack waits for you. You kneel beside the hearth and search again, because desperation is repetitive. This time you lift a few larger charred pieces. They are like brittle already spent. One snaps between your fingers with a dry click. You hold the broken fragment and imagine trying to build a fire from such leftovers. A spark might catch briefly, then die. It would be like trying to make a meal from the smell of bread. The economics of fuel could be unforgiving. In 18th century cities, coal prices rose and fell with transport taxes, weather, labour disputes and war. In rural places, fuel poverty could depend on land access and local custom. A household without enough money or rights might spend hours gathering what a wealthier neighbour bought in a single cartload. Time itself became fuel. So did strength. You listen to the house, it is still. The cold has a way of making numbers feel physical. A cord of wood, a bushel of coal, a stack of peat, a bundle of sticks. These are not abstract measures tonight. They are minutes of warmth, hours of sleep, meals cooked, water thawed, illness delayed. You begin to understand why people guarded fuel carefully, why theft of wood could provoke anger, far beyond the value of a few branches. A stolen stick was not just property. It was a stolen hour beside the fire. Researchers differ over how often fuel scarcity pushed households into illegal gathering, compared with accepted customary use. Some records make wood theft seem common, even routine. Others suggest local communities often tolerated small acts of survival until they became too visible. The truth likely shifted from parish to parish, from landlord to landlord, from winter to winter. But you can feel the temptation now. If a fence rail would burn and children were cold, what kind of moral philosophy would keep your hand still? You look toward the rough chair near the table. It is wood. So is the stool. So for that matter are parts of the house, though. Dismantling your shelter to heat your shelter is the sort of plan that sounds better only if you're very tired and possibly a little theatrical. You walk to the stool and touch it. Solid enough. Useful. It could become fuel, but then the room loses furniture and the fire would not last long. Burning possessions is a final language and you are not ready to speak it. Not yet. Still, you understand why people sometimes did. Broken tools, old baskets, worn shoes, scrapboards, anything that would burn might enter the hearth when winter tightened its grip. The thought makes the room feel poorer than before. Not because there are fewer objects, but because every object now carries a second identity. Chair or heat, basket or flame, rag or tinder, door if things become very bad. The mind begins converting the world into warmth. You return to the chest and find no hidden fuel there either, only clothing bedding and the faint smell of stored wool. Useful in another way. You remind yourself that warmth does not come only from flame. Heat can be conserved as well as made. But without fire, every strategy feels like bargaining with a creditor who already knows you are short. You settle near the bed and draw the cloak close. The cold continues to seep into the room, but now you understand its accomplice. Not merely weather, not merely bad luck. Scarcity has entered with it. Ownership, market price, distance to woodland, rights remembered or denied, labour available or exhausted. The dead hearth is not only a household accident. It is a small dark opening into an entire economy of heat. Outside chimneys keep their secrets. Some smoke, some do not. The village sleeps beneath the same sky but not the same warmth. You lower your hands into the folds of your cloak and breathe slowly. The bitter taste of ash remains faintly in the air. You know now that if a coal were offered, it would be precious. If a stick appeared, it would be counted. If morning came with fuel, it would not be taken for granted. And so you sit beside the empty hearth wrapped in wool, thinking not of grand events, but of the small materials that kept people alive. A branch, a brick of peat, a black lump of coal, a bundle carried home on a bent back through frozen lanes. The room is dark, but the lesson is clear. Cold is weather. Endless cold is weather plus poverty. You turn from the empty hearth toward the table, because once warmth has failed, hunger steps forward politely and asks if it may make everything worse. The table is small, rough, and colder than it has any right to be. Your fingers touch its surface and recoil slightly. Wood should feel solid, familiar, domestic. Here it feels like something stored in a cellar. A few crumbs lie near the edge, hard enough to resist pressure beneath your thumb. Bread, perhaps. Old bread. Winter bread. The kind that asks a lot from the teeth and gives very little back emotionally. You gather the crumbs into your palm and bring them closer. They smell faintly sour with a dry yeasty bitterness. Not spoiled, perhaps, but far from comforting. In the cold, even food changes character. Fat hardens. Ale chills into dull sharpness. Pottage thickens. Cheese becomes waxy. Bread stiffens until it feels less like nourishment and more like a small construction material. You find a covered bowl near the far side of the table. The cloth over it has gone stiff at the edges. When you lift it, the smell rises slowly, restrained by the cold. Grain. Onion. A trace of cabbage. Maybe yesterday's broth now congealed into a pale lumpy mass. It is not rotten. That is something. But without fire it cannot become soup again. It remains food in theory, which is less useful than food in practice. Across many 18th century households, the main meal often depended on a pot kept near or over the fire. Pottage, porridge, stew, broth, boiled, grain beans, peas, roots, scraps of meat, if fortune had visited recently, and not just waved from the road. The hearth made humble ingredients edible. Without heat, the difference between having food and being fed could be painfully large. You sit on the stool and look at the bowl. The cold room is quiet around you. It makes the act of eating feel strangely exposed. No clatter from the pot. No steam softening your face. No smell of toasted bread or warmed ale. Just the faint scrape of your sleeve as you pull the bowl closer. You taste a little with one cautious finger. Cold. Thick. Salty in patches, bland in others. A modern person might call it unacceptable, and reach for a microwave with the confidence of a small domestic monarch. You unfortunately have no microwave. You have a dead hearth, a cold bowl, and the kind of night that does not care about texture. You try a crumb of bread. It resists, then softens slowly in your mouth, releasing a faint flavour of grain and smoke. It is not pleasant exactly, but it is something your body recognises. Calories. Stored sunlight. Work made edible. You chew with slow determination because hunger has no patience for aesthetics. A curious food custom comes to mind in parts of Europe. People sometimes used bread trenchers or thick slices as edible plates in earlier centuries, and old bread often found second lives in soups, puddings and thickened stews. Bread was too valuable to waste just because it had become stubborn. Tonight, though, without heat, all these clever transformations remain locked behind the same missing thing. Fire! Always fire. You search the table again. A small crock sits near the wall. Inside, perhaps butter or dripping has hardened into a pale lump. You press it with a fingertip. It barely yields. Fat is precious in winter, dense with energy, but cold fat on cold bread is a grim little banquet. You spread a trace anyway, scraping with the edge of a wooden spoon. The spoon itself feels icy at first, then warms reluctantly in your hand. There is also a cup. You lift it and smell ale weak and sour. In many places, small beer or ale was a common daily drink, safer, or at least more familiar than questionable water, though not magically pure in every circumstance. It provided calories too modest ones, but welcome. You sip. The liquid is shockingly cold and your teeth object immediately. It runs down into your stomach like a reminder that the inside of you is also part of this winter. You set the cup down softly. The room seems to listen. Food storage in cold weather is a complicated blessing. Cold slows spoilage. It can preserve meat, dairy, and leftovers longer than summer would allow. But freeze and thaw bring their own troubles. Root stored badly can rot. Grain can mould if damp. Meat can become too hard to cut. Milk can ice over. And anything requiring cooking becomes a promise deferred until fuel returns. Some researchers question how often poor households in the 1700s experienced true caloric crisis during ordinary winters, as opposed to the extreme years of failed harvest war or price shocks. Parish records, market accounts, diaries and household books suggest a wide range. Some families managed carefully with stored grain and preserved foods. Others hovered close to hunger, where one cold week, one lost wage, one empty fuel basket could tip routine hardship into fear. You look at the bowl again. It is not enough to say people were used to this. Familiar hunger is still hunger. Familiar cold is still cold. The body may learn patience, but it does not become a poem. It wants warmth. It wants food that can be swallowed without negotiation. It wants hands steady enough to lift a spoon. You eat a little more. The spoon moves slowly through the thickened broth. Each mouthful tastes of yesterday. The cabbage has gone sweet and faintly sulphurous. The grain is swollen soft in some places, firm in others. You imagine it hot steam rising, the smell filling the room, your fingers wrapped around the bowl. That imagined version feels almost luxurious. Not because the ingredients are fine, but because heat would make them generous. Without heat, everything is reduced. The table has another object on it wrapped in cloth. You open it and find a heel of cheese, hard darkened at the edges but edible. You cut a tiny piece with difficulty. It breaks rather than slices. The flavour is sharp enough to wake your mouth. For a moment you feel almost grateful. Cheesebread weak ale, cold pottage, not a feast, not even close, but enough to keep the body speaking. Outside the village remains silent. Inside the cold bowl and hard bread teach a lesson that grand histories often skip. Survival is not only battles and laws and famous names engraved beneath portraits. It is a person sitting at a table in the dark, deciding whether to eat cold broth now or save it for morning, whether to drink the last ale, whether the cheese should be shared, whether the child gets the softer bread. You are alone in this room, but the choices feel crowded with absent people. A mother might soften bread in broth for a toddler. An old man might refuse food and pretend he is not hungry. A servant might eat after the household scraping what remains from a pot. A widow might stretch grain with water until the meal becomes more suggestion than substance. These are not dramatic gestures. They are the quiet arithmetic of winter. You finish only part of the bowl, not because you are satisfied, but because cold food becomes tiring. Eating itself takes effort, and the body oddly wants to curl inward rather than continue. You cover the bowl again, smoothing the cloth over it as if tucking it in. There is something tender and ridiculous about that. You wipe your fingers on the rag at your belt and sit still. The meal has not warmed you, not noticeably, but it has steadied you. A little energy returns, muted but real. Your thoughts feel less scattered. The cold still presses against the wall, still slips beneath the door, still waits at your feet. Yet inside you the bread and cheese and ale begin their slow work. You rise from the stool and glance once more at the table. It looks humble, poor even, but it holds the remains of labour from field, dairy mill, brewhouse, kitchen and hand. Every crumb has travelled through someone's effort to reach this dark room. You pull the blanket closer, breathe through the sour smoke smell and turn toward the bed again. The night is not kinder now, but you are a little less empty. You leave the table behind and move toward the bed, carrying the small heaviness of cold food inside you. It sits in your stomach like a stone that has heard rumours of nourishment. Not comforting yet, but useful. Useful is the great word of this night. Beautiful things can wait until spring. Useful things are invited in at once. The bed waits in the corner, darker than the rest of the room, its posts and curtains forming a box of shadow. You reach out and touch the hanging fabric. It is coarse beneath your fingers, thick with dust and the faint old smell of sleep. At first the curtain feels cold, then slowly your hand warms the patch it touches. That is encouraging in a very small, very 18th century way. You pull the curtain aside. The air inside is different. Not warm, no, let us not become fanciful. But it is stiller, less touched by the draughts that move through the room. The bed has made a chamber within a chamber, a little cave of fabric and wood. You lean in and smell straw wool linen, smoke old breath, and the earthy sweetness of long-used bedding. It is not the crisp lavender fantasy sold in modern shops by people who have never feared a dead hearth. It is human, practical, a bit stale, possibly judgmental. You lift the top blanket and slide one hand underneath. The bedding is cool, but not as cold as the table or floor. It has stored some memory of bodies, or perhaps it has merely been protected from the moving air. Either way, it offers more hope than the hearth. In many households of the 1700s, beds were among the most valuable possessions a family owned. A bed could represent years of labour in woodrope straw, ticking blankets, coverlets, curtains and mattresses filled with whatever the household could afford, from feathers to wool, flock to straw. Probate inventories often listed beds carefully because they mattered. They were property, comfort, status, and survival all at once. You sit on the edge and feel the ropes beneath the mattress shift with a low creak. Rope beds needed tightening now and then, which gives us the old phrase about sleeping tight, although people will cheerfully argue about how directly one thing led to the other. History, like bedding, often sags in the middle if you pull on it too hard. You take off nothing important. That is the first rule tonight. The idea of undressing for bed belongs to warmer rooms or stronger fires. You keep your layers on because clothing is part of the bedding now. Cap, cloak, wool, wrap, stockings, blanket. You're not so much going to sleep as entering storage. Before lying down, you check the bedding with your hands. Damp is the enemy. Cold, dry cloth can be endured. Cold, damp cloth steals warmth with enthusiasm. You press the lower blanket. It feels dry enough. You shift the straw mattress slightly and hear the faint crackle within. Straw-filled mattresses were common among poorer households, and the straw had to be changed when it became crushed dirty or lively with guests one did not invite. Let us simply say that the past was very generous with tiny roommates. There is an odd little practice worth remembering here: bed warmers. Those metal pans filled with hot coals and passed between sheets were used in some homes to take the edge off cold bedding. Of course, they required hot coals. This is where the night politely coughs and gestures toward your dead hearth. A bed warmer without fire is just a pan with ambitions. You pull back the covers and slide in. The first contact is unpleasant. The sheets clasp your legs with a cold, flat intimacy. Your shoulders tense. Your breath catches. For a moment the bed feels like a pond in February. Then you force yourself to stay still, because thrashing only pushes warm air away and invites fresh cold into every fold. You breathe slowly. You tuck your knees upward. You curl slightly, reducing the amount of yourself exposed to the empty air. The body knows this shape. It has known it longer than language. Curl in, protect the chest, guard the belly, keep hands near warmth. You slide your fingers under your arms and tuck your chin closer to your chest. The wool cap scratches your forehead. The cloak bunches under one shoulder. The straw mattress pokes faintly through its covering. Nothing is ideal. Ideal is not currently on the guest list. You pull the curtain closed. The darkness becomes thicker. Outside the bed, the room remains cold and wide. Inside, your breathing starts to matter. Each exhale adds a trace of warmth and moisture to the little enclosed space. Too much damp would be bad, yes, but for now, the still air feels slightly kinder. You begin to understand why bed curtains were not merely decorative. They trapped heat. They blocked drafts. They made a private weather. Specialists continue to disagree about how common fully curtained beds were among poorer households in different regions, since inventories vary and surviving examples often belong to people with more resources. Yet even simple hangings, wall cloths, or shared bedding could create a similar effect. The principle is simple enough: make the warm space smaller, and the body has a chance. You listen from inside the bed. The sounds of the room change through fabric. The creaks soften. The shutter scrape becomes distant. Your own breathing grows louder, slow, and close. A thread of cold still slips in near your feet, so you adjust the lower blanket, pressing it beneath your heels. Another small improvement. Another tiny agreement with the night. You remember the wool you plugged with a rag, the straw tucked at your ankles, the heavy cloak, the cold food. Each small action has led here. Not to comfort exactly, but to a position from which you might last until morning. Survival is built in layers, just like clothing. One practical decision over another until the body's persuaded to continue. The bed begins to change. At first the warmth is imaginary. Then it becomes real faintly. Your legs no longer feel pressed by ice. Your shoulders release a little. The air near your face softens. Your toes remain uncertain, those tiny philosophers of despair, but even they have quieted somewhat inside the stockings and straw-guarded boot gaps. You do not sleep yet. You are too alert. The cold has sharpened you, and the silence outside the curtains feels full of possibilities. A mouse in the wall, a neighbour crossing the lane, the distant settling of snow from a roof, the faint memory of fire in the fabric around you. Every sound arrives slowly as though it has travelled through wool, but the bed is doing its work. It asks something of you in return: stillness, patience, the humility to accept less than warmth and call it progress. You breathe in the smell of straw and smoke, and you let your body become a small furnace beneath the blankets. Not a grand furnace. Not one of those impressive iron stoves that would later change many winter rooms. Just the quiet heat of one living body carefully contained. The darkness behind your eyes begins to loosen. You think of all the people who have done this before you. Farmers, widows, servants, children, travellers, old couples, new mothers, apprentices, and the nameless many who disappeared from records but not from nights like this. They knew the bed as refuge, cupboardness, cave, and a last warm country. You shift once more gently so you do not lose the pocket of heat you have made. The straw whispers beneath you. The curtain hangs still. Beyond it, the dead hearth waits in ash and silence. Inside the bed, beneath wool and breath and patience, you're no longer facing the entire winter at once. You have narrowed the night to the size of your own heartbeat. You lie there for a while, wrapped in your careful arrangement of cloth and breath, listening to your own body adjust. The bed has become a small island, but islands are never entirely separate from the sea. The cold still presses at the edges, patient and steady, waiting for any lapse in your defences. Then you hear it, a faint shuffle, not from the walls this time, not from the shutter, from somewhere lower, closer to the floor. A soft, irregular sound, like something shifting its weight with hesitation. You hold still. Another sound follows, a small, muffled thump, then a quiet exhale, not quite human, not quite mechanical, something alive but not particularly interested in announcing itself. You lift your head slightly within the bed curtains and listen harder. The sound comes again a little clearer now. A hoof against wood, a slow scrape, then a faint rustle as if straw is being rearranged by a very modest architect. Animals, of course. You lower your head again, not alarmed, just aware. In many rural homes of the 18th century, especially among poorer households, animals were kept close to human living spaces during winter, not always in the same room, but often near enough that their presence was felt, heard, and sometimes smelled quite distinctly. Chickens, goats, even small pigs might share a structure or be housed just beyond a thin partition. Their warmth, their breath, even their smell contributed in subtle ways to the overall survival of the household. You consider this for a moment, then shift slightly to peer beneath the edge of the curtain. The room beyond is dim, but your eyes have learned its language now. Near the far wall a shape moves, low, rounded. A goat perhaps, or a small pig. It shifts again, settling into straw, its body compact, conserving heat, in the same instinctive way you are. A second shape lies nearby, smaller, less active. Both are quiet, their presence more felt than seen. The air carries a new scent now. Earthy. Animal. Not unpleasant exactly, but certainly not subtle. It mingles with the smoke and wool and damp wood, creating a layered atmosphere that feels inhabited. You let the curtain fall back into place. It is strange how quickly the mind adjusts. A moment ago the room felt empty. Now it feels shared. Not crowded, not lively, but quietly occupied. You're not alone in this effort to endure the night. The animals too are managing their own version of the same challenge. There is a certain practicality to it. Animals produce heat. Not enough to warm a room entirely, but enough to make a difference at the margins. In a world where margins matter, that difference is not trivial. A few degrees, a little less damp, a bit more movement in the air. These are the kinds of advantages that accumulate quietly. A lesser-known detail from the period surfaces here in some regions, particularly in colder climates. Livestock were occasionally brought into the main house, or into adjoining spaces during severe weather, not only to protect the animals, but also to benefit from their body heat. It was not ideal by modern standards, but then again, modern standards are rarely consulted during a long winter night without fire. You shift your position slightly, adjusting the blanket around your shoulders. The bed has warmed a little more now. Not enough to relax completely, but enough to ease the sharpest edge of the cold. Your breathing has become slower, deeper. Each exhale lingers a moment longer in the enclosed space. From beneath the bed, or perhaps just beyond it, another sound emerges. A faint scratching, quick light, persistent. Mice. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Where there is straw food and shelter, there are mice. They move through the walls, beneath the floor, along the edges of the room, following their own small routes of survival. They're not interested in you, not really. You're simply another large, inconvenient object in their landscape. You listen to their movement, the tiny patter of feet, the soft gnawing at something unseen. It is oddly comforting in a way. Life continuing. Small, determined, unbothered by the absence of fire or the presence of cold. The mice do not philosophize about winter. They simply persist. The presence of animals changes the character of the night. It is no longer purely silent. It has texture now, layers of quiet activity. A goat shifting its weight. A mouse exploring the edge of the table. A faint breath from something sleeping just beyond your sight. You adjust your hands beneath your arms again, tucking them deeper into the warmth you've created. Your fingers feel less stiff now, still cold but responsive, capable. There is a long-standing discussion among historians about how people in the past perceived the proximity of animals in domestic spaces. Some argue it was seen as entirely normal, even comforting. Others suggest it was tolerated rather than embraced, a compromise driven by necessity rather than preference. The truth, as usual, likely shifts with context. On a warm summer day, the presence of a goat in your living space might feel intrusive. On a winter night like this, it might feel like an ally. You listen again. The goat settles. The mice continue their quiet work. The house creaks softly, adjusting to the cold. You breathe in. The air inside the bed is warmer now. Not warm enough to forget the night, but warm enough to rest within it. Your body begins to loosen its vigilance just slightly. Not sleep yet, but the edge of it. The place where thoughts become slower, less urgent. You think of the village outside. Other houses, other beds, other animals tucked close to human spaces. Each household managing its own version of this same arrangement. Layers of cloth shared warmth, small sounds in the dark. The cold remains. It has not retreated. But it has been negotiated with, adjusted to worked around. You shift once more, carefully preserving the small pocket of warmth you've built. The straw beneath you rustles softly. The curtain hangs still. The animals settle into their own quiet rhythms, and in that shared stillness the night feels just a little less empty. You lie there half-curled, listening to the small life of the room when a different thought begins to press forward. Stillness keeps what little warmth you have, but stillness also limits what you can do. Your mind circles back to the hearth, to the empty basket, to the cold food. There are things that could be improved perhaps, small tasks, small adjustments, the kind that feel manageable in theory and ridiculous the moment you try them with numb fingers. You open your eyes again. The bed has softened the worst of the cold, but it has not erased the situation. It has only made it survivable, and survivable, unfortunately, still leaves room for effort. You push yourself up slowly. The air inside the bed releases its fragile warmth at once, like a secret told too quickly. Cold slips in, curious and immediate. You resist the urge to dive back under the blankets. Instead, you sit on the edge, letting your feet find the floor again. The shock is familiar now. Not pleasant, never pleasant, but no longer surprising. You stand. The cloak settles heavily around you. The wool layers shift, holding what little heat they can. Your hands emerge reluctantly from their sheltered place beneath your arms. You flex your fingers. They respond, though not with enthusiasm. Movement feels slower, slightly disconnected, as if your hands are considering each instruction before agreeing to follow it. You step toward the table again. The candle stub catches your attention. It is small, barely more than a remnant, but it exists. Light even a little could change the room, not for warmth, but for clarity. For the ability to see what you are doing without relying entirely on memory and guesswork. You pick it up. The wax is cold and slightly tacky. The wick is short darkened from previous use. Lighting it would require a spark. The tinderbox waits where you left it. You glance toward it, then back at the candle. A decision forms. You retrieve the tinderbox and open it carefully. The flint and steel feel heavier now, more deliberate. You crouch near the hearth not because it will help, but because it feels like the proper place for such an attempt. Tradition has its own quiet gravity. You strike. The first spark jumps briefly, then dies against the cold air. You strike again. A brighter spark this time landing on the thin charcloth. It glows faintly, a tiny red eye opening in the dark. You lean closer, shielding it with your hand. Your breath must be careful now. Too strong and it dies. Too weak and it fades anyway. You blow gently. The glow deepens, spreads slightly. The charcloth begins to smoulder, not flame but promise. You bring the candle wick close, touching it to the ember. For a moment nothing happens. Then slowly the wick catches. A small flame rises. It is not impressive. It does not roar or leap. It simply exists steady and quiet, casting a faint circle of light around your hands. But in this room it feels almost extravagant. You hold the candle up. Shadows retreat slightly, revealing edges, shapes, textures. The table becomes more defined, the walls less abstract, the bed less like a cave and more like a constructed thing. Even the animals in the corner shift into clearer outline, their forms no longer imagined but seen. Light changes everything. Not the temperature, not the draught, not the empty hearth, but perception. And perception in a night like this is a kind of power. You place the candle on the table, anchoring it with a small pool of melted wax. The flame flickers, responding to the subtle currents of air, but it holds. You look at your hands in the light. The skin is pale, slightly reddened at the knuckles. The movement's still slow, but more certain now that you can see them. You flex your fingers again. Better, not warm, but functional. In the 18th century, work did not stop entirely when the sun set, especially in winter when daylight was scarce. Tasks continued by candlelight or firelight, though carefully, because both were expensive in their own ways. Wax candles, tallow dips, oil lamps, each had their place, their cost, their limitations. Light was not taken for granted. It was used with intention. You consider what can be done. Not much, perhaps, but something. You return to the wall where you place the rag. In the candlelight, the gap is clearer. You adjust the cloth, pressing it deeper, smoothing the edges. The draft lessens further. A subtle change, but real. You move along the wall, checking for other weak points. A small crack near the corner. You find another scrap of fabric and tuck it in place. Each movement is slow, deliberate. Your hands protest, but they obey. You move to the door next. The latch sits slightly loose. You press the door more firmly into its frame, adjusting the angle until the gap narrows. The cold air still finds its way in, but less boldly now, less directly. You step back and observe. The room is still cold, the hearth still empty, but the edges have been tightened, the leaks reduced, the small defences reinforced. A curious detail from the period comes to mind. People sometimes use rolled cloth straw or even specially made draft stoppers along the base of doors to block cold air. Simple, practical solutions to a persistent problem. Nothing elegant, nothing complex. Just an understanding that warmth once gained must be guarded. You feel that understanding now. You return to the table and sit again, the candlelight steady beside you. The flame casts a soft glow across the surface, turning the rough wood into something almost gentle. The bowl, the bread, the cup all appear slightly more inviting under its influence, though you know better than to trust appearances too much. There is an ongoing discussion among historians about how much nighttime activity varied across different households and regions. Some suggest that after dark, especially in winter, most people reduced their activity significantly to conserve fuel and energy. Others point to evidence of continued work, social interaction, and even leisure by candlelight. Likely it depended on need, resources, and habit. Tonight your activity is minimal but meaningful. You sit for a moment longer, letting your hands rest near the candle, absorbing what little warmth it offers. It is not much, but it is something. Enough to soften the stiffness slightly. Enough to remind you that fire, even in its smallest form, changes the world. You glance toward the bed. It waits still, holding the warmth you built earlier, though some of it has already begun to fade. You know you cannot stay out here long. The work is done such as it is. The improvements made. You rise again slowly and carry the candle with you. The light moves across the room, shadows shifting, revealing and concealing in equal measure. You reach the bed and pause, looking back once more at the hearth. Still empty, but now not entirely dominant. You set the candle near the bed, close enough to see by, far enough to be safe. Then you pull back the curtain and slip inside, once more careful to preserve what warmth remains. The bed closes around you again, the small cave restored, and this time you bring a little light with you. You settle back into the bed, drawing the curtain carefully so it falls into place without disturbing the candle's fragile flame. The small light flickers just beyond the fabric, casting a muted glow that turns the inside of your little enclosure into something softer, almost amber in tone. It does not warm you in any meaningful way, but it makes the darkness feel less absolute. And that alone changes your breathing. Your body begins to notice things now that urgency has eased. The ache in your fingers, the dull heaviness in your feet, the slight tightness in your chest when you take a deeper breath of the cold, dry air. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would cause alarm in daylight. But here in the stillness, each sensation becomes more defined, as if the cold is quietly underlining parts of you for emphasis. You shift slightly, testing your limbs. There is a stiffness there, particularly in your hands. When you curl your fingers, they move but slowly, as though the message has to travel further than usual. You bring them closer to your body again, tucking them beneath your arms, letting the warmth you've gathered do its quiet work. Illness in a room like this does not arrive with fanfare. It slips in gently, often unnoticed at first. A cough that lingers, a chill that does not quite leave, a dampness in bedding that never fully dries. In the 18th century, people lived with a wide range of conditions that today might be quickly treated or prevented. Respiratory ailments were especially common in winter, when cold air smoke from fires and close living conditions combined into a kind of slow, persistent strain on the body. You breathe in again more carefully this time. The air carries the faint residue of smoke even without an active fire. It lingers in the walls, in the fabric, in the very grain of the house. Over time, that smoke could both preserve and harm. It helped keep insects at bay, dried out certain materials, and added a layer of protection against damp. But it also filled lungs, irritated throats, and contributed to the coughs that echoed through many winter nights. You imagine the people who lived here. Someone may have slept in this very bed not long ago, breathing the same air, wrapped in the same blankets. Perhaps they coughed into the night, turning away so as not to wake another. Perhaps they rose before dawn, joint stiff, lungs heavy, and went about their work anyway. There is a quiet endurance in that image, but also a kind of wear that does not show itself all at once. A small unusual belief surfaces in your mind. In some places, people once thought that certain illnesses were caused by bad air or miasma, invisible but harmful vapours that drifted through environments. While the theory was not entirely accurate by modern understanding, it reflected a real observation that air quality mattered. In a room like this, with lingering smoke and limited ventilation, the idea does not feel entirely misplaced. You adjust the blanket again, pulling it closer around your shoulders. The warmth inside the bed has stabilised somewhat. Not growing, but holding. Your body has reached a kind of balance, producing just enough heat to maintain a fragile comfort. Still, your throat feels slightly dry. You swallow, then reach toward the edge of the bed where you left the cup earlier. You hesitate, then decide against it. The ale is cold, and while it might ease the dryness briefly, it would also lower your internal warmth. You withdraw your hand and tuck it back into place. Better to endure the dryness than invite more chill. There is a continuing discussion among medical historians about how people in the 18th century understood and managed illness, particularly in relation to environmental factors like cold and damp. Some treatments focused on balancing bodily humours, others on practical measures like warmth, rest and nourishment. Without modern germ theory, explanations varied widely, but many people recognized at least intuitively that cold and exposure made sickness more likely. You feel that truth now not as theory but a sensation. Your nose tingles slightly. Your ears, though covered, still carry a faint ache. Your breathing is steady, but you are aware of it in a way that suggests your body is paying closer attention than usual. It is not failing, it is monitoring. Outside the bed, a faint cough answers your thoughts. Not yours, from another room perhaps, or from a neighbouring house carried through the thin walls and the still night air. It is distant, muffled, but unmistakably human. A single cough, then silence again. You listen, but it does not repeat. The sound lingers in your mind, though, a reminder that this night is shared not just with animals and quiet movement, but with other bodies managing their own small battles against cold and fatigue. Some winning, some not. You shift again, more carefully this time, preserving the warmth you have built. The straw beneath you rustles softly. The candle flickers beyond the curtain, its light steady but modest. Your body begins to settle further. The initial tension has eased. The sharp awareness has softened into something slower, more rhythmic. Your breathing deepens. Your muscles relax one by one as if checking out of a long day's work. Sleep approaches, but cautiously. It does not rush in. It lingers at the edge, waiting to see if conditions are acceptable. Too cold and it will withdraw. Too much movement, too much discomfort, and it will remain distant. But here in this small pocket of relative warmth, it begins to consider your request. You close your eyes. Behind them, the darkness feels different from the room's darkness. Less cold, more internal. You focus on your breathing, the slow rise and fall, the steady rhythm that has carried you through the night so far. Another faint sound reaches you. The goat shifting again, a soft exhale. The mice continuing their quiet work. The house settling. Life continues even here. A subtle, almost philosophical thought drifts through your mind. Survival in this time was not a single event, but a continuous process. Not something achieved once, but something maintained moment by moment, decision by decision. Warmth food, rest shelter. Each one requiring attention, effort, and a bit of luck. You have managed all four in small ways. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but sufficiently. Your body recognizes that. The stiffness in your hands eases further. The ache in your feet dulls. The dryness in your throat becomes less noticeable. You're not warm, but you're no longer actively losing ground. And that tonight is enough. Your breathing slows. The candle continues to flicker softly beyond the curtain, its light a quiet companion rather than a necessity now. The room beyond remains cold, still unchanged. But inside the bed, inside your layers, inside your own steady rhythm, something has shifted. Not victory, but endurance. And in the long stretch of a winter night without fire, endurance is its own quiet form of success. You hover at the edge of sleep, not fully gone, not fully present, when a quieter, more uncomfortable thought begins to settle in. What if this is not enough? The bed has given you a pocket of warmth. The food has steadied you. The candle has softened the dark. But winter is not impressed by small victories. It waits. It measures. It asks how long you can continue like this, and whether morning will bring relief or simply more of the same. Your eyes open again. The curtain glows faintly from the candle beyond, a dull amber that feels almost gentle. You listen to your breathing, then to the faint life of the room, then to something further still, an awareness of the village beyond your walls. Because you know there are other places to go. Not comfortable places, not dignified ones perhaps, but warmer. You shift slightly the blankets rustling around you, and consider the possibility that many in this time would have faced leaving your own space in search of shared heat. Not for convenience, for necessity. In many 18th century communities, systems of poor relief existed at the parish level. These were not generous by modern standards, but they were structured attempts to prevent absolute destitution. Assistance could come in the form of food, small payments, clothing, or in some cases access to communal spaces like poorhouses or almshouses, where warmth and shelter were more reliably maintained. You imagine such a place now, a larger building perhaps, thicker walls, a fire that is kept burning not for one household but for many. The air inside would be heavy with smoke, bodies, damp wool, and the complicated scent of shared hardship. Beds might be close together, privacy would be limited, comfort would be uneven, but it would be warmer. You pull the blanket closer instinctively, resisting the idea, because warmth in that setting comes with a cost that is not measured in coin alone. To enter such a space often meant acknowledging need publicly, accepting help that might be recorded, judged, or remembered. In some regions, receiving parish relief could carry a social weight, marking a household as struggling, dependent, or unable to sustain itself. There is a long-running discussion among social historians about how people experienced these systems, whether they were seen as essential safety nets or as institutions that reinforce social hierarchies and expectations. Some accounts suggest gratitude and relief. Others hint at embarrassment, reluctance, even quiet resistance. You can feel that tension now. The idea of warmth is appealing. The idea of leaving your space, your small control over this room, less so. You turn your head slightly, listening again. The goat shifts. The mice continue their faint, persistent work. The house creaks softly. These are familiar now, known quantities. Outside, the village remains still, but not empty. You imagine stepping back into the lane. The cold would greet you immediately sharper now after the relative shelter of the bed. The path to any communal building would be dark, perhaps uneven, perhaps longer than it seems in memory. You would arrive at a door that may or may not open quickly. You would explain yourself briefly, quietly perhaps, with a certain practiced tone that does not ask too much, and then if admitted you would join others. The warmth would be shared, not owned. The space negotiated. The sounds of other people's breathing, coughing, shifting, dreaming. The presence of many lives intersecting in a single room. A curious, less discussed detail comes to mind. In some places, those receiving aid were required to follow certain rules or perform specific tasks in return, depending on local customs and the nature of the institution. Even rest could be structured conditional part of a larger system that balanced care with expectation. You shift again deeper into your blankets. The bed you're in may be cold, but it is yours, at least for this night. The adjustments you have made, the blocked drafts, the layered clothing, the small pocket of warmth belong to you. They're fragile, but they're controlled. You weigh that against the imagined warmth of shared space. There is no clear answer. Among those who study this period, there is ongoing conversation about how often people chose to rely on communal resources versus enduring hardship privately. The records show both patterns. Some sought help early, others waited until necessity left no alternative. Pride, fear, habit, and circumstance all played their part. You feel those influences now, even without fully naming them. Your body, meanwhile, has its own opinion. It has begun to settle again, the warmth in the bed stabilizing once more after your earlier movement. Your breathing slows. The ache in your hands has softened to a dull memory. Your feet, though still cool, are no longer protesting with the same urgency. You are not comfortable, but you are holding. That matters. You close your eyes again, this time with a little more confidence. The thought of leaving fades slightly, not dismissed, but set aside. A possibility, not a decision. Something to consider if the night worsens, if the cold deepens, if your small defences begin to fail. For now you remain. The candle continues its quiet work beyond the curtain. The room maintains its slow, steady stillness. The animals breathe. The village sleeps. And you, wrapped in wool and straw and careful choices, drift once more towards sleep, carrying with you the knowledge that survival is not only about what you have, but also about what you decide to do with it. Sleep loosens its hold before it has fully claimed you. For a while you drift in that shallow place where the room becomes less solid and more like a thought. The curtain is no longer only fabric, it is a dim horizon. The candle is no longer only flame, it is a small golden pulse beyond your eyelids. The cold becomes not an enemy, not exactly, but a pressure at the edge of things, steady as a hand resting on a door. Then the night shifts in your mind and the village begins to widen. You are still in the bed, still wrapped in wool, still surrounded by the faint animal breathing of the room. Yet your thoughts travel outward along frozen lanes beyond the cottages, past fields, stiff beneath frost toward towns and cities, where winter does not become easier simply because there are more people to complain about it. In a city of the 1700s, cold gathers differently. You imagine narrow streets, tall houses, leaning inward roofs, edged with snow gutters hardened with ice. The air is not clean and empty like the village night. It is crowded. Smoke from hundreds, perhaps thousands of chimneys hangs low beneath the winter sky, mixing with fog-damp stable smells, market waste, coal, soot, tallow smoke, and the breath of people packed close together. The cold there does not arrive alone. It comes wearing smoke. London, Paris, Edinburgh, Boston, Amsterdam, Vienna. Countless ports and market towns, each has its own winter character. In many 18th century cities, coal became increasingly important, especially where wood was scarce or expensive. Coal burned hot and could sustain urban household workshops, inns and public spaces, but it also thickened the air. The famous smoky atmosphere of London was not invented by the industrial 19th century. Earlier visitors already noticed the darkened buildings, the soot and the smell. You breathe in carefully beneath your blanket, and for a moment the faint smoke trapped in the fabric seems to become city smoke. Denser, bitterer, more human. You picture a street before dawn. A milk cellar or water carrier moves carefully over slick stones. A baker's oven glows behind a shutter. A watchman stamps his feet not from drama, but because toes are fragile little negotiations. A cartwheel strikes a frozen rut with a wooden crack that travels between buildings. Somewhere someone opens a door and a blade of warm light spills briefly over the street before vanishing again. The city has more fire than the village, but also more need. Every hearth depends on fuel brought from elsewhere. Coal carried by ship or barge, wood from distant estates, charcoal for particular trades, bundles sold by vendors. The poor buy in small amounts when they can, which often means they pay more for less. This is one of poverty's favourite tricks, and it has been enjoying itself for centuries. You imagine a family in an upper room several floors above the street. Their hearth is smaller than they wish. The chimney draws badly. Smoke curls into the room instead of rising, properly stinging eyes and catching in throats. The window is shuttered against the cold, but the room needs air or the smoke becomes unbearable. Open the shutter and the cold enters. Keep it closed and the smoke stays. A charming choice if your definition of charming is two bad options wearing little hats. City warmth is uneven. A wealthy house may have multiple fireplaces, thick curtains, carpets, servants to tend fires, and enough coal stored for bad weather. A poor lodging house may crowd bodies into one room where a weak fire burns only part of the day. A workshop might stay warm near the forge oven or dye vat while nearby sleeping quarters remain damp and chill. A tavern glows invitingly because warmth attracts customers, and customers attract coins, and coins attract the continued existence of warmth. An odd urban detail comes to mind. In some cities, people gathered near bakeries, brewhouses, glassworks, or smithies, not only for business, but because these places produced real heat. Nobody needed a grand theory. If the oven is warm, people find reasons to stand near the oven. Humanity can be very sophisticated, but also very simple. You shift beneath the blankets and the bed ropes creak softly. The imagined city continues. Markets in winter have their own harsh beauty. Frozen fish stacked like dull silver. Root vegetables under straw. Meat stiff in the cold air. Women with baskets tucked under shawls. Men with reddened hands unloading sacks. Children sent on errands carrying coins in clenched fists, and instructions not to lose them as if the street itself might steal. Bells ring somewhere muffled by weather and smoke. In the 1700s, cities were expanding in population, and with that growth came greater pressure on housing, food, sanitation, and fuel. Urban poor households often lived in cramped conditions, sharing buildings with other families or renting rooms by the week. Crowding could preserve body heat, yes, but it also spread illness, noise, tension, and smells that no amount of historical romance should be allowed to perfume away. You can almost hear the coughs now. Not one distant cough like before, but many. A chorus scattered through alleys and stairwells. Winter coughs, smoke coughs, damp room coughs. The sound of lungs doing their best in air that has asked too much of them. Specialists remain divided over how much urban smoke changed daily health in the 18th century, compared with other dangers like infection, malnutrition, and overcrowding. The evidence is tangled. Bills of mortality, diaries, medical notes, and city complaints reveal patterns but not always clean answers. Still, when you imagine that low ceiling of soot and fog, you do not need perfect statistics to understand that breathing was part of winter labour. You draw your own breath more slowly. The village room feels almost clear by comparison, though not comfortable. The animals in the corner, the straw mattress, the dead hearth, these are humble troubles. The city adds scale. More fire, more smoke, more bodies, more loneliness, more chances for help, more chances to be overlooked. You imagine crossing a city bridge at night. Water below moves dark and slow, perhaps edged with ice. Lamps burn weakly along the way, if lamps exist there at all. A wind comes over the river, and pushes through clothing as though inspecting you for flaws. Behind windows, fires glow in scattered rooms, some bright, some faint, some absent. Heat maps itself across the city like privilege made visible in orange light, and yet cities also offer possibilities. Charitable kitchens, hospitals, churches, inns, workplaces with fires, neighbours close enough to hear trouble through a wall. Crowds can be cruel, but they can also make rescue more likely. A person freezing in a remote field may vanish into weather. A person shivering in an alley may still be seen by a watchman. A market woman, a servant sent out before dawn, may be seen, not will. The distinction matters. Your thoughts drift back to the small room around you. The candle is burned lower. Its flame leans, then steadies. Shadows move softly along the curtain. You're not in London or Paris or any smoky city street. You're here where the hearth is cold and the village sleeps. Still, the wider world has entered the bed with you, carried by memory and imagination. The cold you feel belongs to one room, but also to a century. It belongs to cottages and garrets, roadside inns and rented chambers, ships locked in harbour ice convent dormitories, soldiers' barracks, poorhouse wards and the narrow spaces behind shop fronts, where apprentices sleep beneath coats that smell of work. You tuck your chin deeper into the blanket. The city smoke fades from your mind, but not entirely. It leaves behind a bitter trace like the ash on your sleeve. You understand now that fire can save and harm at the same time. It warms the hand and dirties the air. It cooks the meal and blackens the lung. It gathers people close and reminds them who can afford to keep it burning. Beyond the curtain, the candle gives one soft tremble. You listen to it without opening your eyes. The village room returns fully, but it feels larger now, connected by invisible roads to every cold room of the age. And as your breathing steadies again, you carry that knowledge quietly, like a coal that is not warm enough to heat you, but bright enough to keep thought alive. Your thoughts drift again, but this time they do not settle into sleep. Instead, they follow a road. It begins just beyond the village, where the lane narrows and bends between hedges stiff with frost. You imagine yourself walking it, though your body remains curled in the bed. The mind travels more easily than feet, especially on a night like this. The road is hard beneath imagined steps, its surface uneven, rutted and edged with frozen mud. In the distance, a milestone stands like a quiet witness, its numbers worn but still legible to those who know the way. Roads in the 18th century are not smooth promises. They are negotiations between weather use and maintenance, and winter tends to win most arguments. You picture a traveller moving along that road now, a figure wrapped in cloak and hat, shoulders hunched against the cold boots, striking carefully to avoid slipping. Perhaps a merchant, perhaps a messenger, perhaps someone simply trying to reach the next village before the night deepens further. Travel in winter is rarely a choice made lightly. It is necessity, urgency, or obligation that sends people out into this kind of darkness. The wind, when it comes, is sharp on open ground. It moves without interruption, finding every weakness in clothing, every gap in wrapping. It does not need to be strong to be effective. Persistence is its strength. You imagine the traveller pausing, looking ahead for signs of shelter. An inn, perhaps. In the 1700s, inns and coaching houses were essential points along travel routes, offering food, drink, rest, and most importantly on a night like this, fire. Not all inns were equal. Some were well kept, with large hearths, multiple rooms, and a steady supply of fuel. Others were little more than rough shelters with a single fire and crowded benches. But even the poorest inn held one advantage over the open road: warmth that was not entirely dependent on your own resources. You can almost see it now. A low building ahead, its windows glowing faintly through frost light spilling unevenly onto the ground. The door opens, and a wave of warmer air escapes briefly, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke, ale-cooked meat, damp wool, and human presence. The traveller steps inside. The change is immediate. Not comfortable, perhaps, but significant. The air is thicker, warmer, alive with movement. Voices murmur. Someone laughs softly. A chair scrapes. Boots stamp against the floor to shake off cold. The fire itself becomes a kind of centre drawing people closer in a loose circle of shared necessity. You shift slightly in your bed, the imagined warmth brushing against your thoughts. Inns were not just places to sleep. They were nodes of information exchange and survival. News travelled with travellers. Goods changed hands. Animals were stabled. Deals were made. And in winter, the fire was not merely a feature. It was the reason the building mattered at all. A small curious detail emerges here. Some inns charged extra for firewood, or for a place close to the hearth, particularly during colder months. Warmth could be itemized, measured and sold just like food or drink. The idea of paying for proximity to heat might seem strange now, but in a world where fuel had to be gathered, transported and managed, it made a certain practical sense. You imagine the traveller counting coins, deciding how close they can afford to sit. Near the fire, the heat is stronger, but so is the competition. Others have arrived before, claiming spots, extending boots toward the flames, turning slowly like human rotisseries, each side warmed in turn. Further back the air cools quickly, shadows deepen. The difference between near and far can be the difference between comfort and endurance. You listen to the imagined sounds. The crackle of burning wood, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional cough, the clink of a cup set down on a table, the rustle of straw as someone shifts on a bench. These are not grand noises, they are ordinary. But in the context of winter travel, they become reassuring. You consider the alternative, a traveller who fails to reach shelter. The road does not forgive easily. Without fire, without walls, without shared warmth, the cold becomes more direct, more insistent. Resting too long can be dangerous. Movement generates heat, but also consumes energy. The balance is delicate. Too much rest and the body cools. Too much movement and exhaustion follows. There has been long-standing discussion among historians about how common winter travel fatalities were compared to other seasonal dangers. Records are uneven, often noting only the most severe cases, but accounts of travellers lost to exposure, particularly in remote areas or during sudden storms, appear with enough frequency to suggest that the risk was real and understood. You pull the blanket closer, instinctively reacting to the thought. Even in your bed, even with your small pocket of warmth, the idea of being outside without shelter sharpens your awareness of what you have managed to secure. The imagined traveller reaches the inn, pays what they can, and finds a place to sit. Perhaps they share a bench with strangers. Perhaps they speak. Perhaps they remain silent, conserving energy, letting the fire do its work. You imagine their hands held out toward the flames, reddened, stiff, slowly regaining movement. The same hands that held reins, carried goods, or clutched a cloak tighter against the wind, now opening palm by palm to receive heat. You look at your own hands beneath the blanket, still tucked close, still guarded, still not fully warm, but far from the worst they could be. There is a certain humility in that comparison. You are not on the road. You are not searching for an inn in the dark. You are here in a room that, while cold, is enclosed, in a bed that, while imperfect, holds some warmth, with clothing, food, and a small flame nearby. The night remains long, but it is no longer unmanageable. You let the image of the road fade slowly, the inn's fire dimming in your mind until it becomes just another distant glow. The traveller finds their place. The door closes, the wind remains outside, and you, wrapped in your layers, return fully to the room. The candle flickers softly beyond the curtain. The animals breathe, the house settles, and the road for now is only a thought that has passed through your mind, leaving behind a quiet appreciation for the shelter you have, however modest it may be. The road fades, the inn dims, and you find yourself once more in the small enclosure of your bed, where breath and cloth have made a fragile peace with the cold. Your body settles deeper now, not into sleep exactly, but into something slower, more reflective. The mind, when it cannot escape discomfort, often turns to meaning, and in a night like this, meaning gathers around the hearth, even a dead one. You open your eyes slightly and glance toward where the hearth waits beyond the curtain. You cannot see it directly, but you feel its presence. It is still the centre of the room even in absence. Perhaps especially in absence. In many households of the 1700s, the hearth was not only practical but symbolic. It represented continuity, family protection, and the boundary between wild cold and human order. To keep a fire alive was more than a task. It was a kind of quiet duty, repeated daily, rarely celebrated, but deeply understood. And when that fire failed, it could feel like more than inconvenience. It could feel like something had slipped. There are stories scattered across regions and traditions that reflect this idea in curious ways. In parts of Europe, it was once considered unlucky to let the hearth fire die completely, especially during certain times of year. Some believed it invited misfortune, illness, or wandering spirits. Others simply treated it as a sign of neglect, a small failure in the rhythm of domestic life. You shift slightly beneath your blankets, the thought settling somewhere between superstition and practicality. Because while the idea of spirits may not trouble you, the consequences of a dead fire are very real. Cold seeps in, food remains uncooked, hands stiffen, sleep becomes uncertain. Still, the human mind often prefers a story. You imagine someone in this house not long ago noticing the fire fade and muttering a quiet phrase under their breath. Not a formal prayer perhaps, but something habitual. A small acknowledgement of the moment. A hope that morning will bring flame again. You wonder what they would have said. The candle flickers softly beyond the curtain, its light shifting in response to the faintest movement of air. It is not the hearth, but it is still fire. Still a presence. Still a reminder that warmth, however small, can exist even when the main source has failed. In some traditions, people carried embers from one fire to another during certain festivals, symbolically renewing the household flame. It was a way of marking time, of connecting one season to the next, of ensuring that the hearth remained part of a larger cycle. Fire was not just fuel, it was continuity. You think of that now, lying in a room where continuity has been interrupted. Not broken entirely, just paused. There is an ongoing conversation among cultural historians about how deeply these beliefs shaped daily life. Were they central guiding behaviour and emotion, or were they background acknowledged but not dominant? The evidence suggests a mix. For some, the hearth was deeply symbolic. For others, it was simply necessary. But even the most practical person faced with a long winter night might find themselves attaching meaning to the presence or absence of flame. You feel that instinct now. The dead hearth is not just cold. It is quiet in a particular way. It lacks the movement, the sound, the light that would normally define the room. It feels like a missing voice in a conversation you cannot quite hear. You adjust your position slightly, pulling the blanket closer around your neck. The warmth inside the bed holds steady, a small private victory. Your breathing remains slow even. The animals continue their soft, steady presence in the corner. Life goes on, but the absence of fire lingers. You imagine the morning, someone rising early before the light has fully returned, moving to the hearth with practiced hands, checking the ash, perhaps hoping for a hidden ember, finding none, then turning to the small rituals of starting again. Flint-still tinder patience, the first spark, the careful coaxing, the slow growth of flame. It is not dramatic, it is not sudden, it is work. But it is also renewal. The room changes with it. Light returns, heat follows, the day begins. You let that image settle, because it offers something the night does not. A sense of continuation. A curious detail comes to mind in some households. The first lighting of the fire in the morning was accompanied by small habits, or sayings not formalized, but repeated enough to become part of the rhythm. A way of marking the transition from night to day, from cold to warmth, from stillness to activity. You wonder what habit belonged to this house, what words, if any, were spoken, whether they were whispered or simply thought. The candle dips slightly, its flame narrowing before steadying again. You watch the light shift through the fabric of the curtain, creating patterns that move slowly, almost imperceptibly. It is a quiet kind of motion, one that invites the mind to follow without effort. You feel your body respond. The tension that held you earlier has eased further. Your muscles relax more fully. Your breathing deepens. The cold is still present, but it has been reduced to a background condition rather than an immediate threat. You're no longer reacting. You are enduring. There is a difference. And in that different space opens for thought, for reflection, for the quiet weaving of meaning into experience. You close your eyes again, not to sleep immediately, but to rest within the rhythm you have found. The bed holds you. The blankets insulate. The candle glows. The house stands imperfect but sufficient. The hearth remains dark, but not forever. And that knowledge, however small, settles into you like a promise that does not need to be spoken aloud. You rest inside the curtained bed, wrapped in the dim glow of the candle and the deeper dark beyond it when your body begins to speak again. Not loudly. It starts as a tremor in your shoulders, so faint you might mistake it for the straw beneath you shifting. Then it moves through your back. A small tightening, a release, another tightening. Your jaw wants to clench. Your arms draw closer to your chest without asking permission. Your knees pull in. The whole body becomes a quieter, older creature, less interested in dignity than survival. You are shivering. It is not dramatic at first. It is almost delicate, a little ripple beneath wool and linen. But it has purpose. Your muscles are contracting in rapid, tiny bursts, making heat through motion when stillness is no longer enough. You're not choosing it. Your body is choosing for you, which is both comforting and faintly insulting. One likes to imagine oneself in charge. Winter disagrees. You breathe slowly and let the shiver pass through you. The bed is still doing its work, the layers are still helping. The curtain still blocks the drafts. But the room has stayed cold for hours and your body keeps careful accounts. It has noticed the missing fire, the cold meal, the thin air near your face, the damp edge in the bedding, the long wait before dawn. It has decided that more heat must be made. In the 1700s, physicians did not understand body temperature in the modern way. Thermometers existed, and medical thinking was changing. But ordinary explanations of cold fever chills and weakness were often shaped by humoral theory, circulation, nerves, spirits of the body and practical observation. People knew that warmth mattered. They knew that cold could stiffen, weaken, and endanger. But the exact internal mechanisms remained partly mysterious. You tuck your hands deeper beneath your arms. The shivering grows stronger for a moment, then steadies. It is tiring. That is the part nobody mentions in cosy winter paintings. A shivering body is working. It burns energy. It demands fuel. That cold bread and hardened cheese you ate earlier now seem less like a poor meal and more like a small deposit in the bank of continuing to exist. Not a generous deposit, but winter accepts small payments when nothing better is available. Your toes send up a dull ache. You curl them inside the stockings. They respond slowly, still there. Still loyal, though not exactly cheerful. A lesser-known curiosity from 18th century medicine comes to mind. Some doctors and household manuals recommended vigorous rubbing, warmed cloths, heated bricks, or bottles of hot water to revive chilled limbs. The logic was not foolish. Warm objects could help. Friction could restore sensation, and movement could encourage circulation. The problem once again is supply. A hot brick requires fire. A warmed cloth requires warmth. The night keeps presenting remedies that begin with the thing you lack. You almost smile at that. Almost. The candle beyond the curtain trembles. The light swells and shrinks, making the fabric seem to breathe. You listen to your own body, to the quick, small motions under the blankets. The shivering has a rhythm now not unlike distant cartwheels over uneven road. You try to relax around it rather than fight it. Fighting wastes effort. The body has taken over a necessary task. Best not to argue with a competent department. There is a continuing question among historians of medicine about how much 18th century people distinguish between cold as a cause of illness and cold as a sign of illness already present. In diaries, letters and medical texts, chills might be blamed for fevers, weakness, rheumatism, coughs, or general decline. Sometimes the connection was accurate in a broad practical sense. Exposure did make people vulnerable. Sometimes the explanation mixed observation with inherited theory. Either way, people treated cold seriously because experience had taught them to. You feel that seriousness in your bones. Not metaphorically though, that sounds poetic, and we're allowed a little poetry as long as it behaves itself. Your bones do feel cold because the tissues around them have lost warmth. Your hands and feet are being asked to sacrifice comfort so the centre of the body can remain safer. Blood flow narrows in the extremities, the core is protected, the edges complain. This is the ancient politics of the body, and like most politics, the people farthest from the centre suffer first. Your fingers flex, better than before but still slow. You bring your hands up near your mouth and breathe into them beneath the blanket. The air returns warm and damp against your skin. For a few seconds it helps. Then the warmth fades and you tuck them back under your arms again. Your breath is useful, but brief. You think of how people in this era watched one another for signs. Blue lips confused speech, clumsy hands, unusual sleepiness, skin that felt too cold. A person who stopped complaining. Complaining in winter can be a good sign. It means the mind is still engaged in our object. Silence can be peaceful, yes, but it can also be something else, a dangerous softness. You remind yourself to remain aware, not anxious, just aware. The animals in the corner shift and one gives a low, sleepy sound. Their bodies are doing their own calculations, fur fluffed, legs tucked, breath slow. They do not know humoral theory or circulation, or any of the tidy language people later attached to survival. They simply fold themselves into warmth and wait. A small comparison comforts you. You are doing the same. The shivering begins to ease. Not entirely, but enough that your shoulders stop trembling continuously. The warmth you generated stays caught beneath the blankets, and the bed absorbs it, holds it, returns a portion of it. This is the delicate exchange that keeps you here. Body to cloth, cloth to air to body again. A little furnace, a little cave, a little stubborn argument against winter. You shift carefully, not wanting to break the pocket you've built. Your knee brushes the side of the bed. The rope frame gives a low creak. The straw answers with a dry whisper. The sound is ordinary but grounding. You're in the room. You're in the bed. You're not wandering the frozen road, not standing in the lane, not knocking at a door that may not open. You are here, and here for the moment is enough. Medical writers of the period often advised moderation, warmth, rest and nourishment in cold conditions, though the recommended details varied widely by region, class and theory. Some advice was sensible, some was peculiar. Some would make a modern doctor raise both eyebrows and perhaps leave the room to compose themselves. But beneath the theory was a practical truth that everyone understood. A cold body must be warmed, slowly sheltered, fed if possible, and watched. You are watching yourself now. Your breathing deepens, the shiver fades into occasional tremors, then into stillness. A careful stillness. Not the earlier helpless kind, but the kind that follows work. The body has spent energy and now gathers itself again. The candle has burned lower. Its light is softer now, more fragile, the flame cupped by darkness. You cannot let it burn forever. Wax is another fuel, another counted thing. But for this stretch of night it has helped hold your mind steady. It has given shape to the dark. You close your eyes. Inside your chest, your heart beats with quiet persistence. Not dramatic, not heroic, just steady. It sends warmth where it must, conserves where it can, and continues its ancient labour without asking for praise. Outside the bed the room remains cold. Inside, beneath wool breath straw, and the last thin wash of candlelight, your body settles after its small emergency. You understand now that cold is not only around you, It is a conversation within you between muscle and blood skin, and breath, hunger, and heat. And for tonight the conversation continues. The first sign of dawn is not light. It is the feeling that the darkness has become thinner. You notice it with your eyes still closed, the way a room can shift before it reveals itself. The black behind the bed curtain softens to charcoal. The candle has burned almost to nothing, now its flame gone at some point while you hovered near sleep. A faint smell of cooling wick lingers waxy and tired. The little borrowed light has completed its service and left without ceremony. Very courteous, very economical, very 18th century. You open your eyes. The inside of the bed is dim, but no longer absolute. The curtains hang around you like dull brown clouds. Your breath still ghosts faintly in the cold air near your face. You lie still, taking inventory before moving. Hands present, feet reluctant but present. Shoulders stiff, back sore from curling too long, jaw tight, throat dry, heart steady. Alive then? A modest achievement, but tonight has taught you not to mock modest achievements. You shift carefully. The bedding releases a stale pocket of warmth and cold air seeps in at once. Your body objects, but less violently than before. The long night has trained you in small insults. You know now not to fling the blankets aside like a tragic stage actor. You move one fold at a time, preserving warmth as long as possible. Outside the bed, the room waits. You part the curtain just enough to look. Pale grey light seeps around the shutter edges, revealing the place with new honesty. Night had softened it. Dawn does not flatter. The hearth is a cold black mouth. The table holds the covered bowl, the cup, the hardened bread. The chair and stool stand where you left them, humble and patient. Along the wall, the rag you pressed into the crack still holds, though. Frost has whitened the chinking nearby. Frost inside. There it is. A delicate feathering near the gap, bright in the thin light. You stare at it a moment, oddly fascinated. It is beautiful in the way dangerous things often are when they are not currently moving. Tiny crystals lace the rough surface, catching what little dawn exists. A miniature winter garden growing where a wall has failed. In poorly sealed 18th century houses, frost could form indoors when cold air met damp interior surfaces. People might wake to ice on window panes, frozen water vessels, stiffened cloth, and breath hardened into delicate patterns near cracks and shutters. The idea of indoor frost sounds charming only to people viewing it from a heated room with slippers and emotional distance. You sit up slowly. Your muscles complain in a low chorus. The straw mattress rustles beneath you. The animals in the corner begin to stir as well, as if dawn has sent a private stage to every living thing. A hoof knocks softly. Something snorts. The mice, less respectful of daylight, continue with their tiny illegal projects somewhere under the floor. You slide your feet down. The floor receives them with astonishing cold. There is a moment when you consider returning immediately to bed and declaring morning a rumour. But daylight, however weak, carries obligation. Fires must be made, water checked, food dealt with, animals tended. The house cannot remain a cocoon forever. Survival by night becomes labour by morning, and history inconveniently expects you to get up. You stand. The first few steps are stiff, almost clumsy. Your body has conserved itself through the night, and now it must become useful again. You cross to the hearth and crouch before the ash. It looks even deader in dawn light. The grey surface is smooth where you disturbed it last night, then settled. You stir it gently with the charred stick. Nothing glows. Not a single coal! You expected this, but expectation does not prevent disappointment. The morning fire cannot be revived. It must be born from scratch. This matters. Before friction matches became common in the 19th century, starting a fire required skill, dry tinder, and patience. Flint and steel could produce sparks, but those sparks needed something prepared to catch them. A household that lacked dry tinder kindling or fuel could face a slow and frustrating morning, especially when fingers were stiff and everything around them had absorbed the night's damp chill. You set the stick down and breathe carefully. The tinderbox remains on the table. The charcloth inside is nearly spent. The candle is gone. Fuel is still absent. The empty basket looks accusing in the pale light, like it has always known you would have to face it again. You go to the door and open it a crack. The outdoor cold spills in sharper than the room, but the air is changed. Morning carries a faint blue clarity. The lane outside lies still under frost. Chimneys are beginning to smoke here and there, thin columns rising from neighbouring houses. That sight lands in you with quiet force. Other fires live, yours does not. Somewhere a rooster tries a ragged call and sounds personally offended by the weather. A fitting ambassador for the day. You close the door quickly, conserving what little warmth remains. The brief view has told you enough. Morning has arrived, but rescue has not. Sunlight is weak. Fuel is still needed. Your room is brighter, not warmer. A less familiar rural custom returns to mind in some households. Ashes were saved and used in practical ways, including cleaning soap making, when combined with fat and processed into lye, or spreading in certain places. Even the remains of fire had value. Ash was not just waste. It was what heat left behind, and people who lived close to scarcity often found uses for nearly everything. You look again at the hearth. Last night's ash may be useless for warmth, but not meaningless. It is evidence of what was spent. Researchers disagree about how sharply ordinary families experience the boundary between night survival and morning labour during harsh winters. Some diaries suggest routines continued with astonishing resilience. Other records reveal exhaustion, delay missed work, and dependence on aid when cold overwhelmed household systems. Standing in this dawn-chilled room, you can feel both truths. People rose because they had to. They also rose tired. You return to the table. The food is colder than before, if that is possible. The pottage has firmed further. The bread seems fully committed to becoming stone. You eat a small piece anyway, chewing slowly while standing because sitting down feels dangerous. If you sit, you may not rise with enthusiasm, and enthusiasm is already in limited supply. Your eyes move through the room, calculating. The rag in the wall should remain. The door needs a better draft block. The animals need checking. Water must be found. Fuel must be begged, borrowed, gathered, or purchased, depending on which kind of difficulty the day prefers. The body must be warmed through movement now, since fire has failed. You wrap the cloak tighter and take another breath. There is something almost cruel about dawn after such a night. You expect it to bring relief because stories have trained you that morning solves things. But history is not obligated to behave like a story. Dawn reveals. It does not always rescue. Still, revelation has value. You can see the room. You can see what failed. You can see what held. The bed held. The layers held. The blocked cracks helped. The food helped. The candle helped. Your own body with its shivering and stubborn pulse helped most of all. You stand in the grey light and let that knowledge settle. The cold remains deep in the walls. The hearth remains empty. The day ahead will not be easy. But you are upright, breathing, thinking. The night did not take you. That is not comfort exactly, but it is foundation. Outside, another chimney begins to smoke. You watch the pale thread rise beyond the shutter gap and understand what must come next. Not rest, not yet. Mercy fuel labour negotiation, and perhaps a neighbour's coal carried carefully through the lane. Morning has opened its cold hand. Now you must decide what to ask from it. You stand in the grey morning and listen to the village begin. It does not wake all at once, it stirs in fragments. A latch clicks somewhere. A shutter groans open. A bucket knocks against wood. A cough rises, then is swallowed by distance. The rooster tries again, still sounding irritated, which seems fair. If anyone has earned the right to be dramatic at dawn, it's a bird standing barefoot in winter. You move toward the door and pause with your hand on the latch. This is the moment the night has been leading toward. The room has taught you what you lack. The dawn has shown you what others still have. Thin smoke rises from nearby chimneys, and every strand of it carries a message. Fire lives there. Fire might be shared. Fire might be refused. You lift the latch. Cold morning air enters bright and sharp. It has the clean bite that night air lacked, but it is no kinder. You step outside, closing the door behind you with care, and the lane receives you in silence. Frost silver coats the ground. Your breath moves ahead of you in faint clouds. The village cottages sit low under the pale sky, each one holding its own private calculations. You walk toward the house where you saw smoke before. The journey is short, but in this cold, even a short walk feels like a negotiation. Your boots press into frozen ruts. The cloak swings heavily around your legs. Wool rubs at your neck. Your fingers, tucked beneath the blanket as best they can be already, begin to stiffen in the air. At the neighbouring door you stop. You listen first. Movement inside. A spoon against a pot. A murmur, perhaps child. Perhaps two adults speaking in the low tones of people who have already begun the day's work and are not emotionally prepared for surprise visitors. Very relatable across centuries. You knock. Not loudly. Loudness feels improper in cold morning poverty. It asks too much. You knock again a little firmer. The sounds inside pause. Then footsteps. The door opens a narrow space and a face appears in the shadow. An older woman, perhaps wrapped in a shawl, hair tucked beneath a cap. Her eyes move over you quickly. The cloak. The ash. The drawn look of someone who has spent a night without flame. She understands before you speak. You ask for a coal. Not a bundle of wood, not a meal, not a place by the hearth. A coal, a little living fire to carry home and build upon if fuel can be found. In many 18th century villages, neighbourly exchange was a key part of survival. People borrowed tools, shared labour, exchanged food, watched children, lent small goods and passed information. Fire could be part of this web, especially when matches were not yet common, and rekindling a hearth from another household's ember saved time and precious tinder. The woman does not answer at once. Behind her you can smell warmth. It is almost painful. Smoke, porridge, damp wool drying near the fire, and the faint sweetness of heated grain. Your body leans toward it before your manners can intervene. She glances back into the house. This is not a simple act of generosity. A coal given away is small, yes, but it comes from fuel already counted. It may mean opening the door longer than desired. It may invite future requests. It may remind others that this household has enough, or appears to. Mercy has social consequences. At last she opens the door wider. Not wide enough to welcome the whole cold world, just enough. She steps away and returns with a small iron pan, or perhaps a shard of broken pot used for carrying embers. Inside, a few red coals rest under ash, breathing faint heat. The glow is not bright in the morning light, but you see it. You feel it on your face, a small, living centre. She gives it to you with a cloth wrapped round the handle. Her expression is practical, not sentimental. Perhaps she says, "Bring back the pan." Perhaps she adds, "If you find wood." Perhaps she says nothing at all because everyone understands the terms. You thank her. A lesser-known habit in some communities was the careful covering of carried embers with ash to keep them alive and prevent sparks from flying. The ash that marked failure in your hearth now protects possibility in the pan. History enjoys this sort of irony. It is very proud of itself. You turn back toward your house, holding the ember pan with reverence that would seem excessive to anyone who has never needed fire. The heat reaches your fingers through cloth. Not much, but enough to feel almost miraculous. Your steps become slower, more careful. If you drop this, the morning becomes harder. If wind catches it, you may lose the glow. If the coal dies, you return to the beginning, and no one enjoys a circular plot before breakfast. As you pass along the lane, another door opens. Someone watches. You feel their gaze. Not hostile, perhaps. Simply observant. In a village, need is rarely private. Today you are the person carrying borrowed fire. Tomorrow, someone else may be. This is how obligation works. It warms and binds at the same time. There is wide discussion among scholars about whether neighbourly help in early modern communities was driven more by compassion, mutual dependence, religious duty, social pressure, or fear of future need. The answer most likely is all of these braided together so tightly that pulling one strand free distorts the whole thing. The older woman may pity you. She may expect repayment. She may remember a time your household helped hers. She may simply believe that refusing fire is bad luck, bad manners, or bad village policy. You reach your door and nudge it open with your shoulder. The room inside feels colder than the lane at first because it holds the memory of dead air. You carry the pan to the hearth and kneel. The coals glow faintly beneath their ash covering. You breathe out, then stop yourself. Too strong. You must be careful. You need fuel. A coal alone is a heart without a body. You look around. Empty basket. Cold table. Chair. Stool. Cloth. Straw. The same inventory, but now transformed by the presence of possibility. You gather the smallest things first. Dust-dry splinters from the basket. A curl of bark from the floor. A few straw stems chosen carefully, not too many because straw flares quickly and dies. You find a shaving of wood near the chest, perhaps fallen from some old repair. It feels absurdly precious. You arrange them near the coal. The old skill returns through the room even if it does not belong fully to you. Fire-making is not force. It is persuasion. Too much fuel at once smothers. Too little gives the coal nothing to teach. You place the straw lightly, then the splinter, then a few thin bits from the broken basket edge. A small sacrifice from an already damaged thing. You lean close and breathe. The coal brightens. A thread of smoke rises. The straw catches a brief golden lick, then another. You shield it with your hand. The splinter darkens, then glows at its edge. You wait, hardly moving. The flame hesitates, considers the room, perhaps finds it poorly furnished but acceptable, and rises. Tiny. Real. You feed it carefully, piece by piece. The basket loses a little more of itself. Broken slat becomes kindling. The flame grows enough to make shadows tremble on the hearthstones. Not a proper fire yet. Not a warming fire, but a beginning. Your face feels the difference first. A faint heat touches your cheeks, then your hands. The smoke lifts toward the chimney, uncertain, then drawn upward. The room does not warm immediately. It may take a long while, and without more fuel the flame may still fail. But the hearth is no longer dead. You sit back on your heels. The borrowed pan rests beside you. It must be returned. The debt must be remembered. Perhaps later you will carry it back with thanks, or with a small piece of bread, or with a promise of help when wood is gathered. Perhaps nothing formal will be said. Villagers often keep accounts in memory, which is less convenient than paper, and much harder to escape. The fire flickers. You watch it with a tired, almost tender attention. Last night you learned what the absence of fire meant. This morning you learn that fire is not only a physical thing, it travels through relationships, through doors opened a little, through neighbours measuring risk and kindness, through objects lent favours owed reputations shaped. Heat has a social life, and as the little flame bends around its first true piece of fuel, the room begins very slowly to answer. You remain kneeling at the hearth, watching the small flame find its confidence. It is still delicate. It leans, withdraws, then leans again, testing each fragment of fuel, as though asking politely whether it may stay. You feed it with patience, breaking off another thin strip from the damaged basket, placing it just close enough to catch not so close that it smothers the glow. Fire, you're learning, prefers to be encouraged rather than commanded. The room responds slowly. The air near the hearth softens first, almost imperceptibly. The smell changes too, shifting from stale ash to something more active, more hopeful. Smoke rises in a narrow stream, curling uncertainly before finding its path upward. You watch it carefully. A poorly drawing chimney could undo all this effort, but for now it behaves. You sit back a little, stretching your stiff legs. The warmth doesn't reach far yet. It barely touches your knees. but it exists. And existence in this case is everything. You think of the morning tasks waiting beyond this moment. Water must be fetched. Animals must be checked. More fuel must be found if this small fire is to survive beyond its first fragile stage. The borrowed pan must be returned, and with it, the unspoken acknowledgement of dependence. But for now you allow yourself a pause. The night is past. That alone feels significant. You glance toward the bed. The curtains hang slightly open now, the small cave of warmth dissolving into the wider room. It served its purpose. It held you through the coldest hours. Now it yields to the day, just as your body must shift from endurance to action. In many 18th century households, the transition from night to day was marked not by comfort, but by necessity. People rose early, often before full light, because the day's labour demanded it. Winter shortened the hours available for work, and every moment of usable daylight mattered. Fire once lit became the centre of activity again. Cooking, heating, drying, mending, all returned to the hearth. You rise slowly, your joints protesting less than before. The small flame continues its work. You add another piece of broken wood, slightly larger this time. It catches, hesitates, then begins to burn more steadily. The fire grows still modest, but no longer uncertain. A quiet satisfaction settles in you. Not pride exactly, something more grounded. A recognition that effort has led to result, however small. The room is still cold, but it is no longer entirely passive. It has begun to change. You move to the door again and open it briefly. The village is awake now. Smoke rises from more chimneys. Doors stand open as people step in and out carrying buckets, tool small bundles of wood. The sounds are still subdued but more frequent. A voice calls across the lane. A dog barks more confidently this time. Somewhere a cart begins to move its wheels, protesting against the frozen ground. Life resumes. You step outside for a moment, the cold greeting you again, though it feels slightly less severe now that you know warmth waits behind you. You look toward the neighbouring house and see the woman moving about her morning tasks. She glances in your direction briefly, then returns to her work. There is no need for words at this distance. The exchange has been made. You close the door and return inside. The fire has grown a little more, enough now that you can feel it on your hands when you hold them out. The sensation is almost startling after the long night. Heat direct and immediate, touching your skin without resistance. You hold your hands there for a moment, turning them slowly. The stiffness eases further. The lingering ache softens. Your fingers regain their full range of movement, each joint responding more willingly. It is a simple pleasure but deeply felt. There is a small, curious detail worth noting here. In some households, people would warm their hands and faces at the fire before beginning other tasks, not just for comfort, but to restore dexterity. Cold hands are clumsy hands, and clumsy hands make poor work of delicate tasks. Warmth, even briefly, could improve the quality of labour. You understand that now in a very direct way. You step back from the hearth and look around the room again. In daylight it appears more worn than it did at night. The imperfections are clearer. The patched wall, the uneven floor, the sparse furnishings. But it also appears more manageable. The unknown has been replaced by the known. You can see what needs to be done. You gather the empty basket and examine it. Damaged, yes, but not entirely useless. It can still hold something. Twigs perhaps, small branches, anything you can find nearby. The day will require effort, but it also offers opportunity. Light reveals resources that darkness hides. There is a continuing discussion among historians about how people balanced immediate survival with longer-term planning in such conditions. Did they focus primarily on getting through each day, or did they maintain strategies for the entire season? The answer likely varied, shaped by experience, resources, and circumstance. But standing here you sense that both approaches must have existed side by side. The present demands attention, but the future cannot be ignored. You set the basket down and return to the hearth. The fire is steady now, though still small. It will need more fuel soon. You glance toward the door again, thinking of the nearby hedges, the possibility of fallen branches, the careful gathering that must follow. But for a moment longer you remain. The room is changing, slowly. The cold is retreating, not defeated, but pushed back from its earlier dominance. The air feels less sharp. The smell of smoke has shifted from stale to active. The light from the doorway and the small fire combine softening the edges of everything. You take a deep breath. It no longer stings. That too is something. You look at your hands once more, then at the fire, then around the room. The night without fire has ended. Not with a dramatic rescue, not with sudden comfort, but with a series of small actions, small decisions, small exchanges, each one necessary, each one part of the whole. And as you stand there in the quiet morning, you understand that endurance is not a single act. It is a chain, and you have held it link by link until the light returned. The fire steadies and the room seems to remember itself, not all at once. Nothing here changes quickly. The walls remain cold, the floor remains hard, and the frost near the crack still shines in the pale morning light. But the hearth has a voice again, a soft crackle, a small settling sound, a breath of smoke lifting upward. After so many hours of ashen silence, even this modest flame feels like conversation returning to a house that had forgotten how to speak. You sit near it not too close because the fire is still young and easily disturbed. Your hands hover toward the warmth. The heat touches your knuckles first, then your palms, then the tender spaces between your fingers. It is almost too much at first. Not painful, but startling. Skin that has spent the night defending itself does not immediately trust generosity. You turn your hand slowly. One side warms, then the other. A simple ritual older than almost every written history and more honest than most. The room begins to separate into familiar things again. The table is not merely the place of cold bread. It is a table. The bed is not only a cave of survival. It is a bed. The wall is not only a breathing enemy. It is patched timber and clay, imperfect, but standing. The hearth is not a grave of ash anymore. It is a beginning. Across the 18th century, domestic fire remained central to daily life for millions of people. Even as iron stoves spread in some regions and coal became more common in cities, the ordinary hearth still shaped cooking work, family routine, and winter survival. Fire organized the day. It gathered bodies. It marked the difference between night and morning, between raw and cooked, between damp and dry, between fear and the first return of ordinary thought. You add one more piece of broken wood to the flame. It catches with a small golden edge. Not enough for luxury, enough for continuation. A less expected detail floats back to you. Now some households treated hearth ash with real care, saving it for cleaning, laundering, garden use, or soap making. What looked like the end of fire could still serve the household in another form. The ash on your sleeve, the ash in the hearth, the ash that covered the borrowed coal, all of it belongs to a cycle of use and reuse. Even endings were expected to work for a living. You look down at the faint grey mark still clinging to your clothing. Last night it felt like failure. Now it feels like evidence. You survived the cold room. You found wool and straw. You learned the wool's weakness and stopped its worst breath. You ate what could be eaten. You turned a bed into shelter. You shared the night with animals, mice smoke, silence, and your own stubborn pulse. You imagined the city, the road, the inn, the poorhouse, the neighbour's door. You learned that cold is never only weather. It is money, fuel, shelter, food, health, pride, kindness, and luck, all braided together in the dark. There is no grand lesson carved into stone. History rarely offers those without overcharging. But there is a quieter lesson, and it sits beside you now like a calm companion. Warmth is made together, not always kindly, not always fairly, but together, by the person who cuts wood, by the one who stacks peat, by the child who carries embers, by the neighbour who opens a door, by the hands that mend curtains, twist straw bank ash, stir broth, and hold a coal alive beneath a thin covering until another hearth can breathe again. Some experts still dispute how far we should interpret experiences like this through material hardship alone, rather than through habit, belief, community, and emotional resilience. The answer is probably not one thing. People were neither helpless victims of cold nor cheerful little snow creatures immune to suffering. They adapted, they complained, they helped, they refused, they endured. They made jokes because honestly, what else is a person to do when even the bread has become furniture? You smile faintly at that thought. The fire brightens. A little more warmth reaches your face. The tightness in your shoulders loosens. Your breath no longer appears as strongly before you. The room has not become warm, but it has crossed a threshold. It is no longer hostile. It is merely poor cold and awake. Outside the village continues its morning. Footsteps pass in the lane. A bucket scrapes. Someone calls to an animal. The day has begun its work indifferent to the private drama of your night. That too is comforting in a strange way. The world continues. Fires die. Fires return. People borrow, gather men, cook, cough, sleep, wake, and try again. You rise slowly and take the borrowed ember pan in both hands. It is cool enough now to carry safely. Soon you will return it. You will knock again, offer thanks perhaps. Say little. Perhaps say more than expected. The exchange will settle into memory another small thread in the village fabric. Before you leave, you look once more at the bed. Its curtains hang open. The blankets are disordered. The straw mattress has shifted. It looks less like refuge in the daylight, more like a practical object waiting to be remade. But you know what it was in the night. A cave, a shield, a small country of breath and wool where your heartbeat kept its appointment with morning. And then you look at the hearth. The flame bends around its fuel. The ash glows faintly beneath. Smoke rises cleanly now. A kettle, if you had water enough, could soon be warmed. The cold food on the table might become edible again. The room might dry by degrees. Your hands might begin their day's tasks with something like skill. The endless cold has not ended everywhere. It waits beyond the door. It sleeps in the wall. It hides under the floor. It gathers in fields, roads, towns, alleys, barns, and bridges. But here in this one small room it has loosened its grip. And for now that is enough. You sit once more beside the fire, letting the warmth reach you slowly. There is no need to rush this final moment. The night was long. The cold was patient. You can be patient too. The flame settles into a low, steady rhythm and your breathing follows it. In, out. A small glow in the hearth, a softer air around your hands, a room still poor, still worn, still touched by winter, but no longer silent. And as morning gathers gently at the shutter, you let the story itself grow quieter. The cold remains outside the circle of fire, now less like an enemy, more like a distant tide. It moves and waits, but it does not enter all at once. The flame keeps its small golden place. Your hands rest open, your shoulders soften. The ash settles, the smoke rises. You do not need to solve the whole winter tonight. You have followed one night through to morning. You have felt the wall breathe frost, the floor pull warmth from your feet, the bread resist your teeth, the bed close around you, the village measure mercy in embers. You have heard animals shift in straw and watched one little flame become enough. Now the room fades into calm. The fire murmurs softly, almost like water. The daylight grows pale and gentle. The hard edges of things blur. Table, chair, bed, wall, hearth, all returning to stillness, not empty now, but held. You breathe in the faint warmth. You breathe out the last of the night. And somewhere beyond this house, beyond the lane, beyond the frozen fields and smoky towns, all the old winter rooms of history grow quiet too. Their fires lower, their curtains fall. Their sleepers turn beneath wool and linen safe for one more hour, one more breath, one more dream. So let the cold move farther away now. Let the ash rest. Let the ember glow. Let the house become still. You are warm enough. You are safe enough. You can let the morning hold what remains. And as the last soft image fades, the little fire keeps watch in the hearth, whispering low, steady and kind, sweet dreams